Welcome to the Village of Cottage Grove Village Board of Trustees meeting on Monday, June 2nd, 2025. This meeting is taking place both in person at Village Hall and hybrid on Zoom, and the Zoom link is at the top of the agenda. It is 6:30, so I'll call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum, and the agenda was properly posted, so we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so this is the public's appearances section, the public's opportunity to speak. We welcome your input and appreciate the community's engagement. This is the opportunity to share comments, questions, or concerns with the board. However, this is the only time during the meeting set aside for public comments, and it's not a forum for dialogue or debate. All comments will be noted, and where appropriate, village staff will follow up, or I will follow up at a later time. Each speaker is allotted up to 3 minutes to give their comments. We ask that everyone be respectful. And we'll begin with individuals who have submitted a wish to speak form and are present for tonight's meeting. After those have been heard, we'll open the floor to others in the audience, and then finally to individuals on Zoom. So we do have one form submitted. So Mark Spahos, if you'd like to come up to the podium, please state your name and your address.
Mark Spahos, 242 Chateau Drive. I wanted to start by thanking everybody that supported me through the process of trying to get elected and trying to get it appointed. Well, that didn't work. One thing that I thought I was going to be able to do was serve on a committee. Initially, I applied for 2 committees, out of the ones that were listed on the website. Personnel committee was one of them because that's my background in the military. There was another one, I don't even remember what it was, to be honest with you. I tried to research it, but I couldn't find it. It's off the internet now. So I didn't receive anything back, so I just assumed, okay, I didn't get selected. And then there was a meeting, and there was I wasn't on any committees, but there were people that I ran against that were on multiple committees. And there was some conversation. I thought, okay, I'm going to apply for 4 more committees tonight. And I did. So we had the meeting on the 21st. On the 22nd, I applied for 4 committees. The committees were, my first pick would be Planning Commission, second Ad Hoc Housing Task Force, third would be Budget Review. During the appointment meeting, it was brought up that I had only applied for 2 committees. After the meeting, some people had reached out to me and said, Mark, why'd you only apply for 2? And I said, I didn't, I applied for 6. They said, well, Cindy said you only applied for 2. So that's a point of clarification because there could have been a misunderstanding or miscommunication. At the end of the meeting last week, I had left, but I review all the meetings, Planning Commission, board meeting. I saw that Cindy said, well, hey, let me see if I can find a committee for Mr. Spahos. Haven't heard anything from you all week. So I want to read to you what my background is and why I applied for a committee and I thought I could bring value. I'm doing this because my constituents said I should do this. I'm a UW-Madison grad, military veteran, American Legion chaplain, business executive and owner. I have extensive experience with over 55 housing, assisted living, memory care facilities, as well as housing for the disabled. I have both management and hands-on experience with PC technology, training, and networking, commercial transportation, enterprise-level logistics, warehousing, data analytics, personnel management in the military as a non-commissioned officer and retention. I have a background in residential and commercial financing, team building, budgeting, planning, and development of business infrastructure to include the financial, intellectual, and physical workflows. I've worked in fundraising. I believe that I will be more than able to add value if appointed to these committees, and I look forward to serving. I bring this to your attention tonight because I believe I'm qualified to serve on at least 1 committee. However, for any other reason other than I could think might be personal, I wasn't selected for any. So I'm going to leave now. I wanted to put that on the record. I thank you for your time and your consideration through this whole entire process. I'm going to now go to a birthday party. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room that'd like to speak? Is there anyone on Zoom? Okay. We'll move on to number 5, discuss and consider the minutes of the village board meeting on May 19th, 2025. The meeting minutes are linked in the agenda as a PDF.
Cindy, I have one, I guess, grammatical. Page 2, 9, Law Enforcement Committee, the last sentence, they discussed traffic calming for long-term planning is missing a T.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And with that, I would move approval of the minutes.
And I would second.
All right, there's a motion by Severson and a second by Murphy. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. We're going to move on to unfinished business, review the final police station plans. So we do have the architect here, Chief Gary, and then also Administrator Giese and Finance Director are all going to kind of collaborate and give an overview on kind of how we got here. And so I don't know who wants, I think, Matt, if you want to kick it off.
Yep. Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, I mean, given the significance of a legacy project, such as a new police station for the community, I felt it would be worthwhile to cover the historical context that led us to this point, and then touch base briefly on some future forecasting to the next census and then the following census after that, which is 15 years out. As Cindy mentioned, then following me, our architects, Engberg Anderson, will provide a overview of the design process, current status of the project, including construction estimates and next steps. And then also Chief Gary is available to answer any operational questions you may have. And then finally, Cameron will conclude with conclude the presentation with a financial update that illustrates how the project impacts and fits into the village's financial picture. So there'll be some key points along the way that we'll touch base on here, but at each kind of census point, you'll kind of see a snapshot of population, equalized value, how our staffing has increased, and then certain facility milestones. So in 1990, the village was a population of just over 1,000. Equalized value, this is the market value of all property in the village at that time, was $28 million. In 1993, Village Hall was constructed at $500,000. And then in 1999, the Emergency Services Building at a cost of $2.5 million was constructed, of which the village was a $1.2 million share of that facility. In 2000, the village's population rose to a little over 4,000 in population, which was a 270% increase over the last decade. The equalized value jumped 660%, or $213 million. And one way to look at this growth is, for the most part, as long as the value is far outpacing the population growth, you're generally thought to be getting good value from the growth, good value to the community. In 2003, the village acquired the Bonnie Road Public Works building. Ultimately, Public Works and Parks and Rec utilized that space. That was at a cost of $400,000. In 2010, village population rose by a couple thousand more, or 51%. Value increased by $372 million over the last decade, or 175%. In 2014 and 15, the village established our first village-only police department. Just prior to that, it was a joint department with the town. With that, we needed space for the police department, and that's where they're currently at today, the Municipal Services Building, which I'll cover here on the next slide. But the cost for that facility and land next to it was $4 million to reconstruct it inside and renovate. So that facility was, or is, 44,000 square feet and includes 3.5 acres of green space next door. As mentioned, the primary driver of acquiring this facility and renovating it was due to needing to find a home for the new police department. With that, also to note that the Public Works, Utilities, and Parks and Recreation departments also ended up moving into that facility as their spaces were no longer adequate at the Bonnie Road building. At the time, it was estimated by the architects that the space needs or space would be, based on the village's growth, likely good for the police department for about the next 10 to 15 years. Given the renovation that was done in 2015 and understanding that time horizon, although still fairly well into the future, we began discussions of planning for village facilities because the village did not have a formal plan for facilities. And ultimately, a study was approved in 2020 and completed by 2021 by FGM Architects. 2020, over the decade between 2010 and 2020, a more modest increase in population of about 1,000 people, or 18%. The value continued to uptick at a pretty good rate, $258 million over the last decade, or 44%. As previously mentioned, the FGM study that was completed in 21, this slide summarizes the key recommendations or findings. Their recommendation was create a centralized one-stop shop for all village services. This became more commonly referred to as the Village Campus Project. The renovations were to include all the current departments that are in the facility, which are Police, Public Works, and Parks and Rec. It called for eventual relocation of Village Hall operations into the Municipal Services Building, with likely this current facility to be, or property to be sold at that time. And then the Bonnie Road building would be demolished and then created into a more extensive outdoor materials yard. The recommendation was to phase that in between 2024 and 2030 at a cost of $20 million. There wasn't any immediate action taken on that study, and in the meantime, in the 2 years between 21 and 2023, the village added a couple thousand in population. Due to this growth, the village chose to re-engage with FGM on that study, and given how the inflation and construction costs sharply rose during that time, combined with the village's growth, combined with then forecasting additional future needs, their updated cost for that village campus would be $52 million, which was clearly not feasible and did not move forward. However, it did lead us to focus on where the most critical need was, and given that from the village's perspective and the needs we were facing, that was with the police department. So the focus shifted to the police department at that time. When FGM focused on the police department, the initial thought was to solve for growth over the next 20 years without needing an addition. So that would have been 44,000 square feet with a total cost of $35 million. And due to the scope of that, it was not, that would take up the entirety of the municipal services building and need other relocation of other village departments. So the focus there was to focus on the facility, expanding that facility on the land that was planned for that purpose. Anyway, at that time, that was also deemed infeasible by both staff and the board. So we were directed to reduce the scope to become more financially feasible with both our tax levy and debt capacity. And Chief worked with the architects to reduce that by 16,000 square feet. And that brought the now current proposed project to about 28,000 square feet and 23.2 million. The 16,000 square feet is still a projected need for the police department, but it's now planned as future additions in a 10 to 15 year time frame. The board ultimately approved the 23.2 million in financial management plan. Now, some forecasting out to 2030, about 4,000 additional population over the last decade, or 60%. Value of the community increasing 240%, or 2.1 billion. And then looking out to 2040, about an additional 40% increase in population, and 115% increase in value, up to 6.2 billion. So some takeaways here, obviously significant increases in population and value as mentioned. From 1990 to current, that equaled 750%, and you can see the additional increases there over the timeframes discussed. Similarly with equalized value, but more notably, and again, this was what we mentioned as the population value being successful for the village as far as a property value standpoint, so that the 750% population increase helped translate to a 4,750% equalized value increase. And although the future projections is a smaller increase, it's a much more notable value. We're anticipating close to 5 billion of additional value into the future. And then to conclude, between the time horizon of 1990 and 2024, the Village of Cottage Grove is actually #1 in the state in both of these categories. Population increase and equalized value, the 750% in population and 4,750% in value. And a couple of comparisons, not necessarily because of size and location, but because of some similar projects that you see below. Obviously, Dane County has experienced a lot of the similar growth, but still these communities didn't come close to touching what we've done here. But however, as you can see below, that hasn't necessarily translated to investments in village facilities or public facilities. So just noted a couple projects here that were done recently or are upcoming from Village of Fitchburg or City of Fitchburg and Village of McFarland. But with that, I can pause for a moment if there's any initial questions. Otherwise, we can turn over to the architects and chief.
Yeah, so like Matt said, I think we can pause here if the board has any questions about the historical timeline of how the village has grown and how the studies over the last 6 or so years have kind of led us in the direction of looking at the police space needs and solution finding there.
I have 2 questions. So what was the reason that the village and the town law enforcement decided to go separate ways? Why is that not being shared?
Not for any particular reason. I don't think it was a village decision, primarily due to the village's increased costs and a split vote for decisions. So the village would want to add an officer, the town would say no, and then we couldn't add an officer. And then eventually we did, but then it would become a village-only officer, and it wasn't practical to have police stop at a border, and they wouldn't. So eventually, the village board unanimously decided to implement a village-only police department.
So I'm just curious if that has been a reconsideration to revisit that because we share EMS and fire.
I mean, the board can always do whatever the majority of the board wants to do is something we could do.
And then I have another question. So I went back through the minutes and I couldn't find it. I know that there was a site approval, but when was the 23.2 million approved by the board? I may have missed that.
Several times. 2024. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was in the financial management plan that gets approved every fall, and then we had approved it again in January. And there might have been one other time before that, so it's been in the financial
Yeah, there's
planning.
been a few
for-
updates,
yeah.
and it's not like the project isn't approved until the bid's approved and the, borrowing is approved, but, that's just what the plan is, but that plan triggers studying and time and other resources.
So if it's in the financial management plan, just so I'm clear, it goes out for bids, and then it comes back, bid selection, there's still a final approval before the project actually goes to the funding piece, right?
Correct.
The board will see the project in the end, and it gets approved. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I
That-
thought.
And that's what will be touched on next, but we wanted to, especially since there's a couple new there's 2 board members here that have not been part of the, planning and previous approvals, so, the expected timeline for those bids to come back to the board would be late July, and rather than, have this presentation at that meeting, we felt it was worthwhile to have it ahead of time.
So going back to the history of the town and the village combining law enforcement with this is a big number that we're looking at. So is that something that we could, again, discuss with the town board, see if law enforcement is interested in combining services moving forward?
Again, and whatever the direction of the board is, however, the town is without a referendum. I'm not sure how. I don't know how it would financially work for them. For instance, when it was a joint department, there were 10 total officers, and for covering both the village and the town. And there was a lot of growth that's happened since then. But in that same time period, when the village started in 2015, we started with 10 or 11 officers just for the village. So the town just has a completely different need and desire for police services.
Sure, and I understand that piece of it, but I'm getting at that we share EMS and fire and thinking as town and village cohesiveness, it would be a nice thing to consider or look at.
Go ahead, Paul.
I have a few questions. Matt, can you talk about what you use for the growth projections into 2030 and 2040? Where those numbers are coming from?
Projections based off of our comp plan.
Okay.
Yeah. So looking at density of likely development that we're generally aware of. So most of it is, not necessarily all development that's in current discussions, but, somewhat likely to happen in that time frame. So using that likely development combined with what the comp plan's direction is for density and kind of going from there.
Okay.
And then if something slows down, a development isn't moving forward quite as, every year I kind of update them. So like, for instance, that 11,500 that we're showing for 2030, a year ago, that was 12,000. So, we just kind of move it here or there and then adjust. Every year we get a update from the state as what their estimate is for a current year. So we kind of true up from there.
So it's possible that growth could slow, or if the comp plan gets amended, that could play a role in those growth projections, right?
Certainly could play a role.
Okay.
They're pretty conservative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Couple more questions. So in the 2021 study, were EMS and fire put into that overview? Because I know we have an agenda item to do a facility study for them that's separate, but I would have thought that maybe we should have included that as part of that facility study. I wasn't on the board then, so if somebody can give me the history why they weren't considered.
We were only looking at actual village services that we control.
Yeah, I wasn't on the board then either, but yeah, I think the scope was that it looked at village departments versus the districts that we partner with.
And then just kind of, and this will go into probably your presentation, but since you had it on your slide, I just wanted to unpack it a little bit. So you noted the village of McFarland at $22.5 million in 2021, and this is something that I brought up at the open house as well as last October. So that is a 56,000 square foot facility. It houses police, fire, and EMS. It has 6 apparatus bays, a complete police wing. It has office space, a break room, an emergency operations center, 3 kitchens, a full-service residential kitchen, living quarters, and it was the first net zero geothermal and solar fire, EMS, police building in Wisconsin. And it also has a meeting room. So I'm having trouble reconciling in my mind how McFarland can fit 3 services into kind of one building. And I understand from 2021 till now, let's say, at a 5% inflation rate, you'd be looking at, let's say, a $28 million building. So I'm having a hard time reconciling how a building half that size for only one department is coming in at 23 million.
Well, the problem is it's not a 5% escalator. That's the problem. If you remember, that FGM was initially saying we could do all village services for 20 million, and then it was 50, and that was in yeah. The same year that they did that. So the difference is if McFarland is going through this now, they'd be looking at a $40 million building.
Okay, so regardless of what the number is, doesn't it make sense, and I know that I said this publicly last October, doesn't it make sense for us to look at a situation that houses all 3? And I understand that 2 out of the 3 are not village owned, but that's one of my just challenges that I'm having. And so when you guys unpack the architecture, maybe you can even fill us in on what architecture is different, because it should be an apples to apples comparison, or at least somewhat close. So I just wanted to bring that up since you had it on your slide.
Yeah, the thought makes sense. I think the general problem with that would be not just put aside citing it and put aside all the collaboration have to come together with it would be 3 different organizations sharing that building, but that probably wouldn't be able to be implementable for 4 to 6 years from now, and by then the police's needs are now now you're probably looking at building 35 to 40,000 square feet for just the police, and then you add those other services in, you're talking about a $50 million building probably, if not more.
I was thinking something similar to Paula is the consideration for EMS and fire too. Have we projected projection for their growth in the future and what they are going to need as well?
That's part of what talking about also later tonight, but I think we need those to run concurrently but separately from this.
Yeah, I would say, when you say concurrently and separately, clearly it wasn't factored in, right? And so we've got a situation where we've got fire and EMS space needs on the horizon. Not to say it's not challenging because there's multiple municipalities involved, But I think the point is, the synergies of having a facility that could be shared offers quite a bit. And I think, pumping the brakes a little bit here and talking about the study that we're going to do for fire and EMS and how that may or may not play into a solution that drives a better long-term result.
So I guess too, just because this is a financial component, so we've seen construction costs go up 10 to 15% year over year. And so really how we ended up at a facility this size specifically is we can't afford to do the project that we need to do. And so when you start adding the additional square foot of fire and EMS, that's from a financial feasibility perspective, you're gonna run into issues. And so, take the final 20 million, add 10%, that would be 27 cost. Add 10%, that would be 28 costs. So it shouldn't be an expectation that costs are gonna go down as we're looking at, if that's the desire to look at a more comprehensive facility, I don't want the board to get a sticker shock when the costs come back significantly higher. And on top of that, we don't even know if that existing land is big enough to combine services at all three. So then you're also talking about land. Additionally, from a location perspective, as what will be discussed at the facilities conversation, that location might not make a sense from a response perspective. So all things that take time. So one of the things that is considered or was considered in the plan is something's gonna have to happen with EMS between 2029 and 2031. So when I present the financial plan in the third step here, you'll see that natural dip off of debt service, which is anticipated to be necessary to bring on doing an EMS and fire, either satellite station or significant upgrade. So I just want to make sure it's clear that it was thought about in this plan and naturally kind of built to make sure that we could make sure that they had the spaces that they need. So I don't want to go into too much of more of the financial stuff before the architects start.
Yeah, let's turn it over to Mike and Chief Gary for the overview of the project.
All right. Excuse me. All right. So I'm just going to kind of give you a rundown of where we've been and the steps that we took to get here. So this started a little bit over a year ago, back in May of 2024. So when we first started this project, we were in what is called pre-design. So it's kind of the initial steps. So one of the first things that we did was looked at the program. So we took the program that was from the studies, and then we had various meetings with the police office and really kind of verified, made sure we had the right sizing for that. And that kind of established the square footage that we were going to do at that point. So through this process, it's very really generalized. We're looking at a big scope. So we're looking at massing, general plan layout. How does it fit on site? So we had a few options on the floor plan. We had a few options on how it actually fits on site. Then when we come to conclusion on that, we kind of have a preferred direction that we want to take with this. We get an estimate, and the estimate's really based off square footage at that point. And one of the last steps that we did there is we presented this at the community night out. So that was a process that took us from May to August. The next step was schematic design. So now we're really honing in on that one direction that we started looking at. And we're starting to develop the floor plan with a little bit more detail at that point. And you can see in the lower left that we are starting to pull up the model massing, kind of getting a shape and a look to it. We're also kind of, at the same time, working the site plan and how it fits within the site plan. So there's plenty of meetings over this time. So this period really happened between August and October. We met with the LEC. There was numerous amounts of village board meetings. And then we had a schematic design estimate who was completed by Myron at that point. And then we accumulated the process with a public information meeting #1 in October. The next step started in November. It's called design development, and that's where we take kind of this approved plan of where we're heading. Still means that there's changes happening, but we're starting to look at a little bit more in detail, both on the interior, exterior, and how the plan kind of lays out through there. You can see the two photos. We are starting to put together palettes for both the exterior, and we're also looking at the interior palette throughout the building. So we met through a couple of times. We met a lot with the owners during this process, something that we regularly do on a bi-weekly meeting. This is also a time in February where we submitted for a site plan approval. We met with the LEC, we met with the Plan Commission, and then this phase ended with a public information meeting number 2 in February of this year. So along this time for that public information, we had a few more renderings, some which you can see out in the hallway out there, but it was just starting to dive in and look at the building at a lot more detail at this point. This is a view down Bonnie Road, kind of looking at the back secure entry area to it. So now the design at this point has really kind of come to fruition. And our next step on what we're doing is really construction documents. So this is the phase that we're currently in and actually wrapping up today, as a matter of fact. But this happened through March through June. So what we do at this time is now we're getting all our ducks in a row and we're producing drawings, we're producing details that will actually go out to bid for contractors when and if that may happen. So during this time, we continue to have owners' meetings, we have final interior meetings, and then that accumulated with a CD estimate, a final estimate for this project, and that brings us up to today's meeting. So just a few shots of what have developed over time, some of the entry lobby shots, and one of the public community room image as well. So this brought us to our final CD estimate. Again, so the process that happened is that Myron Construction did the estimate, they sent it out to subs, so they were getting kind of real-time quotes on this, so we feel pretty comfortable about it, but again, it's just an estimate. So you can see in the upper left-hand corner, that's really the building and the furniture part of the project. So what's included in there is the solar panel system, but that is actually going to be an add alternate when it comes out. So what that means is basically you can choose to have it or you don't. It includes the geothermal system, which was approved along the way, in-floor heating, and then the furniture estimate as well. So that came in around 17.6 million. So on the right side of the project, we tracked the soft costs. I gotta move something here. Okay. So the soft costs are all the stuff that's not in the building, so we like to track. So there's a little bit of variance in here. There are allowances and quotes that we get, but from the top, there's AV equipment that you have on there working with a third party. We're looking at the public safety radio antenna. That's a third-party system, so we've been working with them to incorporate this through the project, and they're giving us an estimate at that time. And you'll see right around 3.08, that's a construction contingency. So that's a 5% contingency that the village would hold. So we have about 860,000 in there. So what that really means is that that is your money. So it's there to safeguard any kind of unforeseen stuff that happens, anything additions that you want in there. Our goal is not to spend any of it, but it happens. But when we don't, that money goes back to you. So the total on all that, and then the allowances for fees are certain things that were already kind of decided in contractual. So that was another additional 2.4 million for that, which then brought us to a total project cost on the bottom of about 20.1, we'll say 20.2 at this point, cost. So the difference between this and the DD estimate is it actually went down about $100,000. So in reality, there was one piece that was pulled out, some of the pond work that we were counting, so it kind of stayed neutral at this, or kind of even at this point, so that's a kind of a good sign at that. And then on the bottom there, you can see some owner incentives. These are things that you may choose, an IRA type of funding, but it's something that potentially could come back, but there is some work that's involved with that, and I'm sure Cameron could get into that a little bit more. So that's just kind of a quick overall rope, but any questions on this?
If there are no questions, I don't know, Chief Gary, if you have anything prepared, or just here for
No.
questions.
Just related to, obviously I started here in December of 2022, so the dissolution of the joint department was pre-me. The one component there is, obviously, the town currently is in a contractual agreement with Dane County Sheriff's Department for their law enforcement services. It would require you question about taking over that type of police service for them. That would require them to basically end that contract and then seek a contract with the village. So there's a lot more pieces and parts to doing something of that nature than a, well, police department can just be joint again type of thing. So
Has that been a consideration for the village to contract out with Dane County like the town does?
the town would have to initiate seeking us.
No, I mean just the village in and of itself.
I can't speak to that.
That's up to you guys.
Cameron, do you want to add anything for the financial?
Heck yeah, we
All
got
right.
a nice
We're-
fun presentation here. I get to talk.
Phase 3.
Well, I guess, very, very excited and happy to be presenting this information. Over the last little over 2 years, there's been a lot of unknown about these projects. And now we've kind of gotten to the finish line and we finally have some concrete or barely concrete financial information. So before I kind of dive into the FMP, I just want to point out that regardless if the village would contract with Dane County for police services or become a joint service, you still need a facility. And so similar to Deer Grove and the fire department, this facility could likely support both purposes as it's designed as a police station. But as kind of we have alluded in this project, kind of how we ended up with the year of 2026 construction or end of 25-26 construction with a lot of the financial burden is a combination of kind of fiscal planning. We knew TID 5 would close or estimated to close in August of 2026, which resulted in a fairly significant or will result in a fairly significant both surplus, which will include payments to the overlying districts, as well as providing some fairly significant tax breaks to the residents of Cottage Grove, similar to TID 7 this past year, covered up kind of year 2 of 3 for the referendum for Monona Grove. So just want to highlight the how significant growth has really put us in a prime position to make this investment without significantly changing the year-over-year increases for providing village services. So we do have some board members here tonight that haven't been presented any version of the FMP outside of the sales report. So I am going to go at this at a high level, but hopefully if anybody has any questions about specifics in this plan. This is a plan, and so as we go through annual debt service issuances, this plan is utilized to both project what our debt capacity may be, as well as what are the fiscal ramifications of certain decisions. We look out 5 years from an operating and capital perspective. Once you get past 5 years from an operating perspective, it's very difficult to truly hone in on what an increase would be. This plan also shows relatively conservative growth estimates. almost every year since I've been here, and probably prior, actual growth has been more significant than what has been incorporated in this plan, and that's primarily due to the conservative nature of this estimate. We would not want growth and increases in equalized and assessed value to be less, because that would mean that we could have the same numbers in this plan, but the anticipated tax impact would be more. And so this plan is really kind of your all in. If we execute the plan, this is the extent of what the project would cost. So as I get to the second page here, Greg put this together for us so we could have an updated plan, but updated capital improvement plan include the revised cost of the police station. So as Matt had presented earlier, the 23.2 million is now $20,235,442. Of that cost, $475,000 includes the solar alternate. If you didn't have the solar alternate, the total base cost would be $19,760,442, including that $860,000 contingency. So ultimately, how do we get to, we obviously don't have the cash on hand to pay for a police project of this magnitude. What we end up doing is we take all of our costs and we reduce to what are we able to throw at this project to help reduce the overall impact. So as I had mentioned, with planning this project with the closure of TID 5, it's estimated that the TID 5 closure will generate about $926,000 of surplus payment for the village. Again, conservatively, we've put $800,000 towards reducing the borrowing. We worked with Ellers and decided that reducing the borrowing was the best benefit of these dollars, as opposed to using it for either operating or other needs. So this would reduce the net borrowing down to $17.4 million, financed in 2026. Again, this is nothing new to the board here. This is the same deck of projects through 2026 through 2030 from the village, including the annual vehicle and equipment allocation and road, streets, and trail maintenance. Again, the methodology behind this may change in future plans, but this is current placeholders for those annual allocations. You see the $18.2 million police costs reduced by the $800,000 on hand. Another meaningful just cost in here is the projected ladder truck that's going to be delivered in 2028. The village has formally made a commitment to that project or piece of equipment, but there's other things in this plan are still can change. In the 2025 budget, there's engineering costs related to the path connection to McCarthy Park, as well as the BB bus pike path and intersection improvements. So these costs, that you see in front of you, represent the final cost to implement those projects. I do want to put a caveat: the path connection to McCarthy Park. Kyla may have an update at a future board meeting. It might be in our best interest to hold on that part of the project to better work with Dane County and others to get kind of multiple partners and players involved in funding that trail improvement. So kind of in all, the next two slides here just kind of reiterate again the water and sewer projects that were part of the 2025 financial management plan amendment. And so the original financial management plan did not include water or sewer projects. We decided it was time to bring those projects into the plan, just to ensure that the village board sees how the whole village finances come together. So that's there's a combination of revenue bonds and GO debt funding for certain projects. Again, this would be GO debt that's funded by user fees as opposed to funded by the levy. But again, because they're obligated on a general obligation basis, it counts against our statutory limit. And so some communities may see higher GO percentage, but it's just they have higher water or sewer debt outstanding, and so sometimes that can artificially increase or have a larger balance of GO debt, even though that the way that it's being paid back is through the user fees as opposed to the levy. Again, none of these projects are approved. These are just projects that were in this last iteration. I will say that there'll be a relatively comprehensive update to both the water and sewer for the next plan, as now we're going to have our full cycle to be able to incorporate those projects into the 2026 version of the financial management plan. So what this page represents is if the current plan, if we didn't do anything, this is our existing obligations. We in 2026 we have $5.2 million of general obligation debt payments. You work your way all the way to the right side. The net tax levy of $2.1 million is what is going to actually be levied for debt service, meaning we have to add that to the tax bills to pay our obligations. There is quite a bit of abated debt, meaning the sources of the debt that took out the debt have to pay for it. So TID 5 has a relatively large balance of $1.2 million in 2026. And again, TID 9, sewer and water have portions as well. We also have quite a bit of premium. So when we issue debt for a premium, those funds are used to offset the interest cost in the future years. So we have money on hand to reduce what we actually have to levy for as part of the overall issuance. So now we get to the kind of proposed 2026 to 2030 general obligation financing summary. And again, these are conservative interest percentages. So currently most of the village's debt is at significantly less of an interest rate than what's being proposed here. The 2026 is a relatively safe percentage, but as we kind of go further out, those estimates become more conservative, again, to make sure that we are, in this aspect, presenting kind of a worst case scenario from an obligation perspective. This next tab is the one that really outlines what is the impact of adding not only the police station, but other projects within the 10-year plan, 5 to 10-year plan. And so what you'll see here, again, just want to make it very clear, nothing that we do from here out to the end of the year will change our 2026 obligations for our debt service and our principal. We know what amounts is due. We're talking about years 2027 and on. So again, if you look at the levy change from prior year, 2027 is when the obligation for the police station debt would come on. But again, while you see an increase related to the police station, not as significant because of the almost $240 million of value coming off of the tax roll, or back onto the tax roll from tax incremental district number 5. And so kind of in a lot of the communication that we presented, we estimated a $350 tax impact on the average home. And so what that looks at in year one is about $320 of debt service, and the remaining portion, that kind of the difference is what would be utilized from an operating perspective, and that can be found in this right column. And so again, this is per $100,000 of value. So when you're multiplying to get to the value of your home, just make sure this is an increment of 100,000. Again, as I had communicated, we went from estimated to be 68% of our debt limit, and now maximizing, and this new or revised plan with the estimates is down to 63.1%. And more importantly, I want to point out that we're back down below 50% in 2030. And again, development will have a significant impact on that percentage. And so if the village, again, continues to exponentially grow, these are, again, worst case scenario in percentages. And so based off of the conservative methodology of the development, we're at a maximum of 63%. Again, this is just some of this is just a part of the annual financial management, just kind of additional facts. You know, we were kind of one as part of the Act 12 shared revenue is actually increasing. So we get 2%, or we're estimating about 2% of the supplemental aid related to shared revenue increasing. Again, that was not meant to be a end-all solution, but it certainly has helped. Some of these, and again, before we get too much in the weed on this, this is some of the assumptions that were used to build into some of the forecasting. In aggregate, it's relevant, but I would expect to see these percentages kind of fluctuate somewhat when we start to dive into the 2026 financial management plan. So the next slide you'll see, because part of understanding the impact of the police station is also understanding the impact on the levy overall. So the biggest part of the levy is the general fund. So this lists out the core revenues and expenditures with some pretty modest expense escalators for certain types of expenditures. And then the most important slide here, again, shows the estimated levy. So again, there's three lines here. There's the general fund levy, the capital levy, and the existing debt levy. So nothing that the village board can decide changes the existing debt levy. But the last line, or the previously approved CIP debt, would be the debt that would have been used to secure and pay for the capital obligations in this plan. And so as you can see, in this plan, we're even with adding a $20 million police station, we are anticipated to see a decrease in taxes from 26 to 27. And again, just want to echo that we would not have been able to see something like that if it wasn't for the Commerce Park, Business Park coming to the village and adding that exponential amount of value. And so that's really driven here. You're seeing the $1.4 million equalized value increasing from 1.1 in 2026. There is estimated to be a modest levy limit gap in 2027. I am not worried about that at this time. We'll sharpen our pencils and make sure that there's resources available and we get that back to a balanced budget. But again, this is just projected at this time based off of mostly 2025 assumptions. As we kind of talk about the levy limit, it's important to kind of understand, and for some of the newer board members, how the levy limit is determined each year. So it's a very common question that I get, that, well, why can't we just, instead of using the levy to pay for debt, why don't we just cash fund those projects? And so it's important to note, under the current mechanism, that funding doesn't exist if there's not underlying debt to take out for it. So we're not able to replace a 1-for-1 in the levy limit calculation. We start off with what is considered our base levy. And so in 2025, you'll see in here that we had a $5.4 million base levy. If we exclude we have to then exclude the prior year adjustment taken. So our base levy for this year was actually 2.5 million, or less than half of the current levy. And so that's not eligible. Those funds aren't eligible to be reallocated for cash funding capital projects. And that's really, in the levy limit world that we are in, is really a crux, because it strangles municipalities and how projects are funded. And so The only mechanism for us as a village to create levy limit room is obviously either referendum or net new construction. And so even if we see a 5%, so again, in this model, let's go forward to the 2026 budget year. Even if we see the 4.355% net new construction, that is only $118,000 or less than 1% of our general fund levy. And so a lot of the times what people will look at that or question will be like, well, how are you guys not able to manage your money? Why don't you guys have any money? It's this funding mechanism that's in place. So again, I think everybody who has their personal budget understands you can't operate on less than a 1% increase. And so year after year, municipalities are required to shuffle things, fund things differently. And in this case, really shift things towards debt financing capital projects.
And it's worth pointing out that these increases, most other communities don't even have. So
Right.
we're the leader in this growth, and it doesn't even keep up with inflation most years. So other communities that aren't having growth, they have no mechanism to increase their levy, but for referendum or debt.
Cam, can you clarify? So you start with line 1 there, so you've got the prior year's actual levy plus the personal property aid. So then you take out the prior levy for the GO debt. So if our GO debt was less, then the actual amount we could levy would go up.
No, because the prior year, because you got to remember in that prior year you added it. So the only reason why your debt was your levy was higher, it's a 1-for-1. Let's say you had a debt adjustment last year of $100, you'd be subtracting out $100 to start this year. So they would effectively cancel out. It's a broken system. It essentially forces municipalities to issue debt in Wisconsin.
So originally we were talking about the impact of the police station when TID 5 closes. It was going to be like $60 on the average home. And on slide, slide 9, you show on the very right side the impact on 100,000. So $79 per 100,000 in 2027. So if the average home was 400, easy math, $320. It's not 60, it's 320. So what am I missing?
So what was presented in the handouts was the net effect. So that doesn't take into account. So when we were planning for this, we knew 300.
Cameron, I think what Pete's asking there, Pete, what you're looking at is that's our entire levy. That's all of our operations. So it's not relative to just the police station. So that would be
So,
the
but
tax.
it's broken out in that final column. But what you're saying is that's the net impact, but it's the gross impact, not the net impact, because of the closure of TID 5.
No, the gross impact is in the previous couple slides that shows the.
If you pull up slide 9, and what you're showing is the tax impact on the far right column there of the
Sorry,
police
I
station.
was looking at what was on.
Right, so
screen.
that's what I'm looking at. And so what you're telling me, that's the gross impact.
Correct.
$79 times the average home it's $320 on the average home. However, the benefit of the TID 5 closure reduces the net impact to 60 on the average home.
Yep, and then one other factor is the MSB debt falling off. So when Ellers worked with the village, they made sure that we took out a 10-year borrowing for the MSB improvements because they knew that facilities were going to have to be adjusted. So now that the debt, we literally made that last debt service payment in March or April. And so that also factors into that debt service coming off.
So this project is kind of critically timed to make sure it lines up with the closure of the TID as well as what Cameron just explained.
Yeah, I understand that, but it just, what he was showing was 320, and I was just looking for clarification. The other question I had was, the debt capacity that you show on slide 10, we say it's gonna fall by 2030 to under 50%. That's based on what we've got in the plan, which doesn't include the study of fire and EMS and the potential capital costs of any facility and anything else that's unknown, right? So at 50%, that's still kind of not a complete picture, right?
Yeah, so I guess I would defer to like the village. So kind of, again, if we're looking at the 2026 update to the financial management plan, I don't think projects should be, if the village is uncomfortable with a certain level of debt, I would say it doesn't make sense to add projects outside of what are critical needs, the facility.
Yeah, totally get it. My point is, we're gonna have more debt, and it's not under 50% once we bake everything that needs to be factored into our capital plan.
No, because if you do the construction in 29 and 2030, the debt would come on in 2031. And then, again, 5 years was presented here, but
Yeah.
there's significant, as you can see, between 29 and 2030, you're seeing almost a 7% decrease. The debt percentage decreases pretty quickly thereafter.
Okay,
So,
the true picture isn't reflected, because 31 and 32 aren't shown, okay. Got it.
so yeah, like I had mentioned, 2029, between 2029 and 2030, 2028 and 2030, with implementation of that plan for the fire and EMS station is a critical component to this. Again, we're again getting ready now that we know the facility needs. Just like this facility, we're getting ready to implement a project that we know is coming down the road. Again, part of when we're looking at the tax impact is based off of my time at the village, what we really are trying to avoid are peaks and valleys of the taxes. And so the way that this project is layered in here prevents, again, do nothing, taxes go down significantly. But then at some point, the community and others are gonna have to pay for a project or fund a project. So you're gonna see a spike. The current plan shows how to implement this to show next to no impact outside of what our typical increases have been on the levy. And so when we're making decisions, or when the board is making decisions, that is something that has been factored into this plan, as a lot of the people on Social Security, these unplanned increases can place significant strains on budgets.
Yeah, I still think for transparency, for conveying the true cost of the project to the people in the village, we should be using gross and not net. I just think it feels to me like the way we're discussing this is that we're trying to hide the true impact of the building on the taxpayers, and it just feels a little icky to me. This isn't a discuss and consider. This is just a review. Are we gonna have a vote to approve an updated FMP?
This is not an update on the financial management
it's not.
plan, no.
Okay.
Yeah, Chris, basically the thought here was, so we, this is really just kind of because of the timing of where this project has landed with some, with the election, new board members, and I mean, there isn't any necessary approval to continue with the bidding process, but we at the same time wanted to make sure, this discussion was had, somewhat ahead of final approval. Just to point out, I mean, specifically, the gross impact is called out under the police station tax impact on the slide 9. It's there isn't any on the summary page. That's just showing how everything comes together, irregardless of what project as far as tax impact.
Yeah, I guess my concern with that is we don't treat any other capital projects the same way. If we decided to redo N and BB, we're not going to say it's free because MSP is coming off the books. So why are we treating the police station differently in that regard?
I guess I'm saying we're not. We're showing specifically what the gross impact is.
There's been a lot of talk about net impact though, and not gross impact, which we don't usually do for other capital projects.
I think what makes this a little unique is that it's a massive legacy project, and as Matt's, and I appreciate everyone's time tonight, and putting together the slide decks to kind of show us how the history of the growth of the village, how we got here, how we have not historically invested in facilities, and we're kind of at a critical need where the investment needs to start happening as we continue to grow, and we have our biggest department in the village, and we need to start making these investments. And we've identified over the last 6 years studying space needs for village departments and where we should be putting our efforts. I think when it comes to communicating it out to the residents here, I think the village staff has done an excellent job of trying to show, the overall impact of this pretty big project, but also how we're timing it with, the TID closures, and we're doing our best to fit it in the capacity for village residents as well. And I think, it's not just our board, it's been multiple village boards before us that have put this process kind of in motion over the last at least a decade. And this is an investment and likely probably a 40-year facility. And so I have also come, from a personal perspective, I've come quite a long way in the last year. I think I've pretty much done a 180 on this project, and realizing, as you really dive into what the needs are for all operations of the village, how are we going to move forward and fit needs for every single department, knowing that we are a lean staff and we're going to have to increase staff. What is what are the next steps, and how do we get there? And this is the next step, and I look forward to seeing the bids come in, and I'm thrilled that it's under budget, and hope it stays that way.
I don't think anybody disagrees that we need more space. I think, at least speaking for myself, the issue I have is the size. Saying this building is going to be 20 to 40 years out, and that's based on population trends, which are, they're I don't know what the word is I'm thinking of, but they're not going to be what we project them to be. Using a conservative estimate on population growth worries me, because 15, 20 years, if we blow past our estimated population, this building is going to be too small in 20 years, and the village board's going to be back here talking about a new building, because the site plan right now is not flexible enough to expand enough on the current site. So we're going to be talking about another building or a satellite station. And I think that's a bad way to design it. I still think the best way forward is just to scrap this plan and look at something that's more flexible and financially manageable and be able to grow incrementally.
Can you maybe speak a little bit more to the site and kind of a future expansion? I know we had talked about that in some of the other meetings, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we did go down a little bit in square footage to get to where we wanted. I think the square footage that we have in there is larger than what is needed. I think you can agree with that, Chief, and that there's flexibility with that space. So I think, during our programming, some of the spaces that did come out on that reduction were more of kind of the, generalize and call exercise spaces. But what we looked for the future was really about expanding the garage and expanding the offices for the officers themselves. So whether that, we can't predict how many people are going to be there, you can make estimations through there, but I think the amount of square footage that we have in there now makes it feel comfortable for quite a while. And then the additions that we have on there will give enough space, and the design is a little bit more flexible to adapt over time as well. That's what we try to keep to.
I guess I just want to make sure I just put this on record. Should the village board walk away from this, you're talking about a sunk cost of $1,135,776. And you're likely still going to come back with a project that is, even if it's reduced in scope, either at the same cost or more, because you'd then be talking about land acquisition, as well as just inflated costs. So I don't want the board to be surprised if you go a different direction and you get something back that's materially more expensive.
Chief, can you just maybe speak to the limitations of the current facility too, and why a new facility is necessary?
So again, the current facility, obviously, we need to get a place up and running for an agency that didn't exist. The board at that time took the actions, and the staff at the time took the actions to make that happen. Was it planned out? No. Did they retrofit a light industrial building for law enforcement, public works, and park and rec? Yes. That building is not purpose-built nor mission-driven. Does it function at its current capacity? Yes, but we're at capacity. Again, when I came in, I was asked to review the facilities. There's obviously inefficiencies in its operations. There's liabilities for the village. I'm not going to go into details related to those, but you've all had a chance to tour the facility. You've seen it. You know what the limitations are, and I've spoken to the other aspect of it. Again, when I was tasked with this project, it was, let's plan something that's long-term for this village. This is an investment long-term, not a short-term fix. And that's the key thing that I've always kept moving with this project is we're not looking to move into something that we're already at capacity. We don't want a facility that literally in 10 years, the village board at that time has to revisit and go, what are we doing now again? We've tried to project this building out for 20 years, if not longer, with the added spaces and areas to add on, so that when it does come that time, operations still can function at this facility without having to cease and move the department somewhere else while construction's going on, and it gives that additional space that's going to be needed for the future. I wish I had that crystal ball. I wish I could sit here and say, this is what the agency's going to be 20 years from now, because this is what the village is going to be at 20 years from now. So that you had the perfect building, the perfect site, and everything was perfect. We're doing the best we can with the information we have and bringing the best product forward to this board. Again, there's been nothing added as in fluff. There's nothing added other than planning for the future of this agency and for this community and for the dedicated members of the agency.
Just from a layering perspective, just want to keep in mind, should this project be pushed back as well, that also pushes back the affordability of that EMS and fire station. So again, as we layer this in, just something to consider. There should also be some consideration for, again, this is a police station, but it also serves several needs. Again, public safety was the biggest need, but the second biggest need was public work garage space. So as they would be vacating that space, Public Works would be backfilling that space. And so the board would have to make some consideration for some short-term plans for public work storage, because the space that we have right now is not adequate for public works. And so there's kind of other departments are playing a little bit of a jigsaw to make sure that highest need is addressed, but there are several other departments that would be benefiting from the vacation of the current space that the police department has.
Excuse me. I totally agree that law enforcement has definitely outgrown where you're at, needs more space. Total agreement with that. I have to respectfully disagree with your statement, Cameron, that, let's say the board would dissolve this project, which pushes off EMS fire, if we possibly consider other things, like the new tech building. Would that be a temporary for law enforcement for the next, say, 5 years until there's a more comprehensive collaborative plan with EMS and fire and law enforcement all in one when you're looking at spending these types of finance funds?
I just want to point out, New Tech is part of a TID district that was incentivized. I don't know the village can even buy that property. So we would have to contact DOR and get approval. There would have to be some consideration because it would become a tax exempt property. So if it's a tax exempt property, there's no obviously increment generated. So that we'd have to add the cost of that project to pay the incentive that Dave's owed for the assessment that was generated. In addition, we kind of get whacked again. That would negatively affect net new construction. So we'd take roughly an $8 million loss on net new construction, which would decrease the operating levy. I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, is that facility smaller than what your current space is?
Is not smaller than current, but it is smaller than the planned facility space. And again, I can appreciate the look at, well, the 5-year, but literally, by the time we move in, we'd be busting the seams again and ready to move out. And unfortunately, I think the village board at that time would be struggling with the same thing of, can we make this work in the large scheme of the village? Or are we scrambling again to find another space?
Go ahead, Chris.
So I just want to echo something Chief said, is that it's very difficult to see where we're going to be at in 20 years. Looking at the comp plan from 2020, that was approved in 2020, our 2040 estimated population was 9,500. And I mean, we're already there 15 years early. Now we're estimating 16,000 and did I say 2,400? Pardon me, 2040. Now we're estimating 16,000 in 2040. I mean, that's a guess. It's a shot in the dark. So I don't know why we would build a big facility when we really don't know if that's what it's going to be like in the future. The current sort of status quo of building, not just in Cottage Grove, but everywhere, is build big and hope for the best. And I think that's a bad way to approach this.
So I have a lot of concerns. I do acknowledge that there is a space problem. So I totally get that. Sergeant Frudiger took me and I saw that. Several people have used the word legacy, right? A legacy project. This will be the biggest project that probably most of us sitting at this table will ever vote on. I mean, it's a big deal. Like, this is a huge deal. And so I've got concerns. So just a couple things. I'm concerned about our next agenda item because to me, it all ties together. But I am concerned that we're going to be in a situation where we build this building, and in several years, we're building a fire EMS building. And so why not look at all of this, like take a bird's eye view and put this all together, right? Like it's like a chess game. One move here, you know, let's be strategic about it. So the other couple things, during the referendum on the library, I know that I read over and over again that people wanted a voice on this issue, and in terms of referendum. So for instance, many library supporters, rightly so, were saying, why do we have this issue and we're not having a voice on this police station? And so I think that's a valid concern, and it's something that I heard during the election. So, you know, I think, yes, we had public meetings, and I attended. I even, back last year, voiced concerns about this project, right? So this isn't new, like, that I'm voicing these concerns. But I think this magnitude, as Chris is alluding to, it's a huge deal. I mean, this is a huge project, and it's expensive, and it's big, and so I think that warrants more public conversation. A couple of the other things, you know, I know and I really appreciate all the number crunching and how you've planned this to coincide with TID 5. I get it, it's wonderful. But we just had, Renee and I just had department heads gave us an overview of their departments, and so our public works director said we are substantially behind in our streets, right? Like, and I don't remember all the statistics she gave, but a lot of them are in really rough shape. And so we're already at a deficit for what we should be doing for public works and street rebuilding, right? Then you put the wells on top of that. And again, I'm taking a bird's eye view and trying to put this all together and make sense of this. But, you know, spending all of this on one facility doesn't allow us to do other things and other needs that are being forecasted, right? And other conversations that are going to happen after this. So I think you know, the thing for me is just because we're growing and our levy's growing, it doesn't mean we have to spend it all. I mean, right? Like, you know, maybe a little property tax relief would be nice. But again, for me, it's this kind of strategic plan. The other thing we have to think about from a resident's perspective is, yes, it's only whatever the dollar amount was, $60, whatever. But you talked about, for instance, with water and sewer, that user fees are going up. And I know that as a village taxpayer, right? Like, I've seen my monthly costs go up on water and sewer. And so even though something's a user fee and not a tax, it's still coming down to what is happening in that citizen's pocketbook, right? So I guess those are my concerns. I feel like this is too big of a project. Physically, I think we need to plan this in concert with all of the other things happening. And my concern is, I don't know how much it costs us to put this out to bid and bids to come in, but I know from a contractor perspective, it takes time to put a detailed bid together. I used to work for contractors. And so what I don't want to see happen is we put this out for bid, we come back in a couple weeks, and this board says no. Like, you know what I mean? So I guess I'd rather have this conversation on the front end before we go this next step, personally.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we also would have said same thing a year ago. I mean, every kind of step along the way, if there's not support, I mean, there's considerable time, resources, money going into it. So, so I mean, totally understand that. As far as feeling it's too big, I mean, how does the board align on what the needs are? I mean, we don't do this based off of feelings.
Yeah, I guess that, you know, that I'm listening to everything I'm hearing here, and, you know, up until maybe the last several months was this need for this incremental fire EMS building in 2030. That hasn't even been factored in here. And is there something that can be combined or not? That's where I'm at, is we really need to kind of pump the brakes and take a look at that before we approve a contract for $20 million. Now, again, we may end up just doing the $20 million, but I haven't seen anything that says, are there synergies? Are there reasons why the incremental EMS and fire, which is, from everything that we've seen, is going to really be focused on the village side? So I don't know how that looks with the current districts, but at the end of the day, we haven't done that. And until we do that, we don't know if there are synergies that would result in a better result or a better project for the taxpayers.
I would say by the time that's all studied, this isn't a $20 million project, it's much more.
No, but again, you're gonna have separate facilities, so ongoing maintenance and operations of two facilities versus one, and there's synergies, right? And I agree with what you're saying. We can't just take another 2 years to figure this out. This needs to be something that if we're gonna do the study, and that's later in the agenda, this should be part of this study, and if it's something that makes sense, we need to move on. If it makes no sense, then we table it and we move forward.
I think synergies you might be referring to, though, just in terms of like of facilities, I can understand that, and having one facility, you could definitely find some efficiencies there. But I think you're talking about then, you know, the police department is a village department. We contract with Deer Grove, which is a district of multiple municipalities. We contract with the town when it comes to fire. And so I think the synergies you're referring to then are really, are operational synergies, and that's going to massively affect Deer Grove and the fire department. And that needs to be studied, again, future agenda item coming up in a couple, hopefully, minutes. But those are much broader discussions that have to happen in terms of public safety for fire and EMS.
But there's a clear need for fire and EMS infrastructure in the village, driven by village requirements because of the growth of the village, right? So I don't know how it's going to play out as far as how the shares of expenses are going to be borne by each of the municipalities. But, you know, the one study that was done in 2022 is the building, the building for EMS and fire would be paid for by the village, but the operations would be part of the district. And how the cards and the chips fall in that, I mean, there's a lot to it, absolutely. But there's no question there's a need for a fire, EMS, and police, right? We're just talking police. Mm-hmm. Are there benefits to taking a step back and looking at something that's more like what McFarland had done?
I'd just like to walk down the path of delaying, postponing what a clear need is in our village safety service. So, we've studied this. I've sat here with many different colleagues talking about various facilities, from the village campus and locating all in one space, hoping to put a library in the mix. And here we are with the absolute need for our department looking forward after not investing in facilities, very minimally, and moving into spaces that were not meant to be utilized, especially by a police department that needs some very specialized spaces. And so kicking the can, down the road, postponing, studying takes another 3 years, finding a location and how do we, purchase the land for another different location that may work strategically better for fire and EMS versus the police department. And then having this property next door to our existing village property creates, some efficiencies there with maintenance and such. So there are benefits of existing on this spot for a police department, as they don't need to be as strategically located as perhaps fire and EMS. And so then we have large fluctuations in taxes for our residents because then the TID 5 comes on the rolls and it goes way down. And then all of a sudden we have a $40 million joint emergency services project, which may make sense to, we can share conference rooms or kitchens, maybe locker room area. I'm not sure how secure that would need to be for law enforcement officials, but, there may be some shared spaces we could utilize. But then we're creating this now $40 million building, potentially, I have no idea what that would cost. So then that shoots the taxes way up. It just creates these fluctuations where, planning this with TID 5 closure creates a very predictable tax rate for our residents. We continue to provide our services, and then we can plan for, in the 2030, 2031, negotiate with our partners, find the best location for fire and EMS, and move forward with those improvements, and take the time to study it rather than throw this out the window, and then in a year, maybe we can throw together a plan to last us 5 years, to then do a plan that's gonna last us 30 years, and when we could have just had the police and then figured out fire and EMS for the 30-year time. So I'm just walking down the path of delaying this when it could cost us more. It could create more uncertainty and unpredictability for our residents and, creates difficulty for our existing departments. Public Works is going to backfill into the police area, and police, we need to, solve a problem now. I'm not excited about spending $20 million. It's a lot of money, but we need to take care of the services we have and then continue to plan for our services for the future and stay on track with our plans. That creates just all this uncertainty with residents, and we need to provide the services as expected for our residents in a predictable, financial picture.
Heidi, I appreciate that you've spent a lot of time on this. I know you've talked about it. I know staff has worked on this a ton. This is my first time at the table to have a voice on this, right? And one of the things that kind of upsets me is that fire and EMS should have been looked at in the 2021 facility study. Because had we done that back then, we would not be sitting at the table where we are today with one project in front of us and another one a few years behind. And so I think where I'm trying to get at is why aren't we looking at all of these things together? And I appreciate that the board has spent time on just the police department, but I'd like to see more attention on fire and EMS because I think we'd be in a very different place today than we are. So I appreciate the work you put in, and again, during the campaign, I heard a ton, and I have to think you did too, that people wanted a voice on this. This is a big expenditure. So I'm bringing their voices to the table.
So we did study fire and EMS during that same time period. Just they were those separate studies. But, yeah, anyway.
And I
There
think-
wasn't any, I mean, it's hard enough to do a village facility, let alone a combination facility. But
I understand it's hard, but it's necessary, right? And this should
Well,
have
I
been
don't-
all
we don't-
one conversation on facilities. I get that joint services are hard, but our emergency services are 3 legs of a stool together. They're equally as important, and we have to give them equal time and attention.
And TID 5 doesn't only have to be for police station. Whatever decision is agreed upon, I mean, that could be towards street improvement. I think there's, 14% of our streets, parks are in good working condition.
You know, Heidi, I totally understand everything that you said. The one thing that you said was, we can't take 3 years. I agree with that. If we're gonna do this, we need to take a pause. We absolutely, and we'll talk about this fire and EMS study, but it has to be holistic. It's gotta be done relatively quickly. And it may yield something that says, you know what, continue with this project. But if there's some nugget there that says there's a benefit for us to work towards one facility, and I don't know what that looks like, but it can't take 3 years. If it does, I agree with you, that we just move forward. But we can't let that happen.
I mean, the problem is, there isn't a site, there's unlikely a site in the village's current footprint, so we're gonna put you know, we might find a site that makes sense for fire and EMS, but I doubt we're gonna find a site that works for the police department. I can drive around, I mean, the village isn't that big.
Northside of Cass and Hamburg has, I mean, it can be, there is options, and I guess until we vet that out.
And I think kicking the can down the road is the perfect analogy, because that's what's been happening for the last 25 years of not investing in facilities. And in the absence of a formal strategic plan, which everyone knows that I am very much on board with starting, these are our strategic plans, and these have been voted on 7-0, 6-1, moving forward over the last handful of years. In terms of taking this to a referendum, it doesn't need to go to referendum. I understand that people want to have a voice on it, but we're not talking about increasing the operations levy like we did, where for a library, it's 2 very different projects.
Yeah, to your point, Cindy, there's no such thing as a non-binding referendum. So if you get a vote that the answer is no, what do you do if the need's still there? And so that becomes very challenging when you're trying to implement public safety projects. So I guess what would be important going forward is kind of knowing that there'd be potential rental spaces and other things needed to fit short-term needs. It cost a little over $1 million to go through this design and studying process and other soft costs that were related to it. I think, if you're probably looking at least at another $500,000 to $600,000 restudying it. And just is the board comfortable with that? Because then we're not talking about the remaining investment of 17.4 million. We're talking about 17.4 million plus 10%, I'll round down, plus the additional A&E. So I just want to make sure, it's one thing to say yes or no to a specific station. It's another thing to know that there are going to be additional costs associated with this. And I don't know the existing site very well, but I do not believe it's big enough for all 3 services. And even if it was big enough for all 3 services, again, we reduce the scope of this project by over 16,000 square feet. That study that's gonna come out for shared services are gonna definitely say we need those square feet. And we've gone through the exercise a couple times that it's not fiscally feasible. We're not able to do a project of that scope. And so to study something that we know that we're more likely than not able to afford, in my opinion, puts us back to the same essential solution at a higher price tag due to it being delayed. And so I wanted to bring that up from a fiscal standpoint, from a policy perspective. It's for the board to discuss.
Go ahead.
I have one comment and then one question for Larry. As to the large fluctuations, if we pause on this, I mean, that's only if we build another huge building, right? Like, if we're building for 2045, yeah, there's going to be large fluctuations. But if we build smaller and more flexibly for 2030, 2035, and keep monitoring that going forward and building what we need in the short term, instead of assuming what we're going to need 20 years from now, they're not going to be as big of fluctuations. I was thinking about what Paula said about hesitance to have all the work put in to go out to bid and then have the potential of us saying no. I was reading this isn't my most recent, but I was reading the most recent municipality. And there's a motion in there that could be made to reconsider previous action or repeal a previous action. Can you speak more about that? Is that something, like, I'm just thinking it's something we might be able to do with the site plan approval, just to sort of put a pause on this so that we don't have it go out to bid and have people spend a bunch of time and energy getting bids ready just to be denied.
Yeah, I would think that at this point, we're not really held to a formal reconsideration. It's a different vote if there was going to be a vote.
Okay, so yeah, sorry. So there's two on here. Reconsideration would be like, that would be like the next meeting, right? And you'd have to.
Yeah, like you vote later on whether to do this study, and you later in the same meeting somebody who.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's you have to be on the majority side to
winning
reconsider, right?
side.
Okay.
Right, if you will.
What about this? This also says rescinding or repealing a previously adopted motion.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that it's not really at this point. I mean, and I think Matt would say the same, that if all of our job is to, as supporters of the village board, is to determine whether we're sensing something going in a direction that, we really need to revisit. I wouldn't worry about any formality in terms of how you do that. That this is if there's a vote to put pencils down, that's not a reconsideration of any other vote. We create a step in the process if need be to do that.
Or even just direction. I mean,
Yeah.
I've pretty much have heard from 4 of you that you don't want this moving forward, so we don't move forward. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, so we don't have to get too worried about the process for that.
Thank you.
Are there any more comments from board members on this topic?
I'd just like to, because, the consensus, so it seems that I would be sort of in the dissent, that I think we should continue to move forward with this and not, and then plan for the next addition in our services and our facilities, and work in conjunction with our partners in our joint services on how to best solve their needs. So I think my preferred strategy would be to get our village departments, check, and we know these are needs, and then we saw in our financial plan that there is room in the 5 years, take the 5 years, plan it out, find the best location, acquire the land, work with our partners, and fill those needs. So that would be my preferred strategy. However, as Matt said earlier, that's kind of in the minority here. So I just wanted that on record. Thank you.
I agree with Heidi, and with that strategy, knowing that this is the immediate need. There's other needs that are coming up in the next 5 years, and to have a plan to fill all of them. But it seems as long as staff has direction, or if you'd like us to provide more direction, we can go one by one.
I mean, we should clarify that, the status quo in this type of situation would be that it goes to bid. So if it's 3-3, it would go to bid. But if it's 4-3, you put pencils down, and that's what we'll do.
I guess I just want to, but we're not changing the cost of any, the cost is the cost. So that shouldn't be considered in the bid process. Just because we're not committing to any additional cost by this going out to bid. So I just wanted to put that out there.
One of the challenges we would have if we do go out to bid is that those bids will only be good for a period of time. And so if if the approach here is to take a short period of time to think about other things, and as Peter said, you know, if it ends up being that you get back on track, those bids would probably be stale at that point, and you'd have to redo it, so, I don't know. It's sort of uncharted territory for us in terms of figuring out what to do when this happens, but we'll just need we'll need more direction.
I think Heidi and I have provided our direction at least. But if other board members want to give a little bit more formal direct, not necessarily a motion, but a little more formal direction to staff on this.
I do not think it should go out to bid.
I agree with Chris.
I agree with Chris and Paula.
You know, whether we go to bid or not, I guess my question is timing. You know, we're later in the agenda, we're going to talk about this study for fire and EMS. To me, the output of that drives whether we continue down this path or not, in my mind. I mean, if that study comes back and it's either too long or there aren't any clear delineations on the synergies or the benefits, then I would agree that we certainly cannot stop in our tracks for 5 years. So then I would, but until we get the results of that, I would put a hold on taking it to bid, because putting contractors through what it takes to put bids together and they're only good for so long, I think it's premature.
Well, I don't think you're going to see a study come, we're not going to have results of a fire EMS study until, I don't think it was really planning on starting until 2026.
And is that study now including the police?
Because that's going to increase scope, and then,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a full another at least year of study.
To-
So
to
we're not
me,
planning on.
Okay, so to me, this is a clear now need. And so we need to talk about the study, but that's something, we got to do it, right? Just like, you know, we had to get an option on the Learning Lander, because if we didn't, it would have been sold, right? And then the whole scope of what we're doing falls apart. So it's the same kind of thing, right? We're sitting here looking at a need, and we're sitting here looking at, there are some alternatives that have not been considered. They have to be considered before we move forward with a $20 million project. I mean, every capital project that I've done of this magnitude, there are alternative considers presented. And here we've got a clear alternative to address, and we haven't even factored it in.
But I think if we're going to come up with a scope and of a new study and potential RFP or not, and we've already talked a little bit and given, reached out to Wisconsin Policy Forum, for example, and they're not going to have capacity to do this until maybe late Q4 or Q1 of 26. Then you're talking, it's probably at that scope level, it's got to be at least a year study. You just take a look at what we've done with FGMA and rush timelines on, some of the library project, for example. It still took months. We're not pushing something out now until 27.
And just to consider too, and this is all assuming we get the study back and we actually implement it. Because by then, it'll be, it could be different board members, and then there's different things to look at, and in the meantime, the police are without space.
And we do know that there are safety considerations with this building. There are space needs. There's recruitment and retention that goes along with it. There's a bigger picture here too. And again, we have been studying facilities for years. We have, previous boards have put this into motion, no problem. And this is a reduced scope study or facility. It was 44,000 square feet. They dropped it down to 28. We know that there's a plan to add on in the future if it's necessary. I think it's a very responsible approach. We know that this is the current need of the village. There is a cascading effect for other village departments. We are going to have a plan to study fire and EMS. Their space needs are going to be a lot different from police space needs. Their location is likely going to be very different from where police can be or should be. I think there's a lot of benefit to being in a municipal-ish campus, and I'm obviously in the minority here, but do you want to take this to bid now, or do you want to?
Could Chief Lang talk about the joint buildings, joint considerations?
Good evening. I've been in many of the joint facilities that you're discussing tonight between McFarland, the west side facility for the city of Sun Prairie. DeForest has a joint facility. The needs of the law enforcement departments is vastly different than the needs of a fire and EMS department. And largely those facilities are segregated between the law enforcement portion of the building and the fire and EMS portion of the building. So there's really no savings in it or economy of scale to build a bigger building that would have all of us in it. Our operations are gonna effectively be separate anyway, largely because of the legal concerns from the law enforcement side of their operation. There is some small shared spaces, like a meeting room. If you, with the newest one being McFarland, they do share a meeting room. They have a courtroom that could double as a very large meeting room, but that's really the only shared space that they have. Otherwise, their operations are completely segregated between their portions of the building. So that's something to keep in mind. And the operational need of the fire department doesn't have, typically speaking, an officer responding with a response time metric from their station, unlike fire and EMS, where fire and EMS are choosing buildings that are strategically located within the community because that's where the resource is housed when it's not physically assigned to a call. The resource for law enforcement is assigned to their squad car and roaming throughout the community. So there's differences in operation and different needs that would say, if we looked at the city of Madison, is there a city of Madison police, fire, and EMS station? No, because they have different needs and they've met those needs with separate buildings.
So Pete, I'm sorry.
So I guess the question is.
Postpone.
What's that?
It's still not, just giving staff direction.
Yeah,
We've
so I
got
mean.
3.
I mean, if
that-
we feel like, you know, and I totally appreciate everything you said, Eric, but I do feel from an infrastructure, a facility standpoint, we're gonna need a facility for both police, and we're gonna need another facility, and so you start talking about 2 different facilities. When you go down the list of ongoing operating costs to maintain, operate 2 facilities, whether it's landscaping, lawn care, power, all the elements of maintaining and operating a facility, you combine into one. I think there's some synergies there, and then there's some other synergies as you had pointed out. So I would like to understand if we can't do an accelerated study, then I'm fine going out to bid. But I would like us to understand, can we do a study in less than a 3-year time? Because I agree with you, Heidi. I mean, 3 years, absolutely not. It's just not acceptable.
Eric, how long did the policy forum study take?
For Sun Prairie,
Yeah.
there was a 3-month turnaround on theirs. But I'd say our request wasn't necessarily that we're gonna put it in, and we're going into the next agenda item. But the request wasn't that we want to study and darn it, we want it now. We got asked to fill a capital management request for future needs. And that would mean that we would expect to, you know, maybe have a study start sometime and complete sometime in 26. Not that we would completely change the scopes and hope that we can ram together a study that gives us some answers in 3 months. I think our goal was, through the studies that we did have in 2022 that identified our operations had the facilities we needed at that moment. Now, since 2022, as evidenced by Matt's statistics in his presentation, things have changed and our future outlook is beginning to look towards the future. That's where we can say for the next 5 years, we'll have what we need, but at the 5-year mark, we're likely gonna need something more than that. And that doesn't include having to find not just a 1-acre site, a 10-acre site that's gonna be able to fit a 60,000 square foot building that includes all 3 public services.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah,
Larry?
and I think, so if we're saying that the need is not that close, it's 5+ years out for fire and EMS, if that's where we're at, and we haven't gotten to that part of the agenda, I still think this notion of alternatives considered, and I think, Chris, you know, you've got some ideas. I don't know what that looks like in your mind. If we're gonna go out for bid, we need to be serious about we're gonna do this. So we're gonna do a bid event, we're gonna select contractors, and we're gonna go. If we're gonna do that, we're done talking about alternatives considered, right? So if you've got alternatives that we should be considering, and if it's not this combined study, we need to get those on the table, and that has to happen quickly. And that's my only point of pumping the brakes before we go to bid, that when we go to bid, we're all aligned, we're gonna do this project. Because if there's alternatives, let's get them on the table, let's vet them out as quickly as we can, and if we can't do it quickly, that's not an option, right?
Larry?
Actually, Chief answered, I was going to ask, just ballpark, what the horizon was for additional, at least EMS needs in terms of space, because that did come up in the previous studies, and that's a big part of this too, where you might say, boy, if everything was lined up in terms of the timing of needs, we'd be talking about that deliberately. But my understanding, and you just said it, was, you know, maybe 5 to the 2030, 31 type time frame, but we were already talking about, so.
Yeah, and it's not just EMS needs. I'm just happen to be the guy in the white shirt that thought that he could add something to the conversation. Fire has similar needs for extra facilities and extra ability to have things for staff that we'll need to plan for in the future, but it's not anything that we're lacking it today, and if we had it today, we could like double the services we could provide, if that makes sense. Is we see on the horizon where there'll be a shift in the services that we'll need to provide, and the shift being we'll need to have more, especially another ambulance, and we don't have space for that right now. Whereas we can run adequately today.
Do staff have what they need?
I don't, for me.
I think, I mean, yeah,
I
I think
don't-
people
I
need to be a little bit more
I mean,
clear on how we're moving forward. We have, you know, the plan was to take this out to bid, and have that back by the second meeting in July, correct? So, I mean, the decision tonight to go out to bid or not, and realistically, are we going to move forward with this project needs that discussion. We need to make sure that staff we're clear with staff of how this is gonna go.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what I'd said, I mean, I certainly would like to see this combined facility. If the facility needs they're disjointed timing-wise, then it comes down to, this is option A, our leading option. Chris, you know, Paula, Renee, if there are other things that aren't on the table as an alternative, we should get it on the table before we go to bid. If there aren't anything that's viable in your mind, then I'm aligned with going out for bid. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at.
Right, I mean, I think we had facility needs identified years ago for the police department, facility needs that we are identifying for future 5-year plans for the fire and EMS coming up. And so investment in facilities, we need to start with that. And this is, again, the plan of action that's been put forward. But yeah, I guess, what other options, aside from a building that's going to be in a different location and far too big and house 3 different departments, what other options would you be interested in pursuing in the next 2 weeks?
Do we have to have this conversation right now? I mean, can we put an agenda item on for the next meeting that talks about alternatives, and we can bring alternatives to the table? I mean, I'm not prepared to present a building plan tonight, right, for an alternative proposal, but if you give me 2 weeks, I'll put some creative ideas together. I just want to pump the brakes on this. I'm not saying no, never. I'm saying, can we talk about some other things in conjunction with this planning? So put this on the agenda for 2 weeks from now. Let's bring some other thoughts to the table. Chris has thoughts on the size, right? I mean, let's do that. We've got a lot of other agenda items tonight, and I feel like we're spinning our wheels at this point and not making a decision.
I agree with you. So is there anything, if we waited 2 weeks, that you would continue down the path? There isn't anything you need. You wouldn't go out to bid till when? When would bid documents go out?
We were planning that if it was approved tonight, we'd go out in 2 weeks, once we got our head around it, get all our documents into shape. So if we come out 2 weeks from now is your next meeting, we'd go 2 weeks after that. Once we have everyone on board, then we'll get everything in place and move forward.
All right, let's plan on that then.
But I guess, do we want, Mike, I mean, how are we talking about, we can talk about all sorts of different kinds of options, but what is that? I mean, those are just, are those all, we're just gonna then direct Engberg to high-level study those quick? I mean, I just don't understand the process here.
I think that
And I
Paula
would
and
be-
Chris are going to bring items to the next meeting for discussion, including costs and,
But that,
But-
but that information isn't, I mean, ideas are a starting point, right? And so those, in 2 weeks, having that conversation isn't gonna result in having the information necessary to evaluate those options, right? I mean, even, and Chris has been consistently, you know, pitching different ideas, but unless we put some meat on those ideas by having them studied, what would that reduction in cost mean? What would it mean for the number of years we'd project to have the facility available? And, you know, it more of, in his idea, what he mentioned tonight about more of an incremental add-on as you need it. We have the idea, but to be able to take action on that idea, we need to put meat on it, right? And that's, I think, I don't know if, I don't want to speak for you, but that's where I feel that do we want to, it won't be 2 weeks, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
The ideas will be a starting point 2 weeks from now, which
Yeah,
I
I'm saying
agree
we
with
can get
Paula that,
we
you
can
know,
take those ideas and get an estimate of what a preliminary study would be, but I mean, each of those are gonna be, you know, additional cost and then time to study them, and all those do is get us some estimates, and, I mean, it really comes down to what is the police department's space need, and the board needs to align on what their needs are, and it can't just be based off of feelings.
so
Because
maybe next,
at the end of the day, I mean, the previous study identified 44,000 square feet of needs. We're at 28,000 now. What is it? 20,000, 25,000, or, I mean, what is it, and how are we gonna align on that?
So apparently I made a strategic error when I said the word feelings, because now you've thrown it in my face twice. And I think for me, this is the first time I've been able to sit at this table, have all the information, and give comments. And so for me, I can't make a decision on this right now. I just can't. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers when we have two new elected board members sitting at the table that were elected with values from people of this community and things that they told us they wanted. It's not fair to us to have to be forced into this right now, and that's what this feels like. And I understand that you all have worked on it for a long period of time, but this is my first kick at the cat, for lack of a better phrase. So I don't have all of the numbers. I don't have all of the data. I'm sorry. I've only been here for 2 months, and I'm getting my arms around all of this.
which I think is the point of tonight too, was to make sure that we were coming at this from a historical perspective.
Correct.
The project perspective and the financial perspective.
It was really helpful, Chief Lang, for your information. I have not heard, I would love to hear from Chief Archibald. You deserve a huge seat at the table as well.
Fire, it's a little bit harder to be predictable. I'm not saying that we need to change everything within a year, 2 years. We're relying on volunteer firefighters. A firefighter gets a new job, they can't come anymore, they have to quit the fire department. There's so many different variables for a volunteer fire department that go into what we're talking about for a facility. Currently, there's no resources for moving to a career model where you're having people stay the night and quarters and places for them to be if something were to change. I guess we were asked to look at the long-term pictures, what Cameron asked us to do. So because I don't know what's going to happen with call volume as the population grows, I know it's going to grow. I don't know how much it's going to grow. For us, we're hitting almost 400 calls a year now, which is unheard of for a volunteer fire department. we're doing the job and we're meeting what we're supposed to. My concern is like you get a handful of people that get a new job and suddenly we're not meeting the need and there's been no planning, no plan to do anything, then we're in the same situation that the police department was in, where suddenly you gotta quickly put something together that doesn't really fit the future needs. So that's what we were presenting, that's what we were talking about. I can't tell you what's gonna happen because I don't know what's gonna happen. We have a lot different variables than the police department or EMS. We're an outlier because we're relying on somebody's free time instead of a paid entity, so.
What are your thoughts on the combination of being at the same site with law enforcement? Is that from fire perspective, is that necessary? Is it not necessary?
I mean, I could see both sides of the argument. I guess I don't want to take a side either way because I don't want to get in the middle of it personally, but I could see the benefits of either side doing it either way. You know, I understand combining it as one building, you can save some of the infrastructure, but I could also see it separate because, like they said, there's different needs. Fire department, we're talking about ISO standards, so you know, the ISO standard says that the fire station needs to be X amount of distance from the border of the fire district. So our standard is different than Chief Lang's standard. He doesn't have that same standard that he has to be within X amount of distance of a territory. Same with Chief Gary over there. So the needs are gonna be different for fire compared to police or EMS. So I guess I can't say what's the best option. That's why we asked for a study so that somebody who does that kind of thing could determine what the best option is, because I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. So.
Yeah, I should have clarified. I wasn't asking for you to settle a
Yep.
truce for everybody tonight.
No, I get it.
Just to get a better picture and background of what does that look like from a fire department? You know, does it make more sense to be integrated into one?
I mean, truthfully, the current station that we're in right now was originally built for all three entities and an emergency government, and they quickly realized that it wasn't big enough for that, and so then they had to shift and separate it out, which added extra costs. So I wasn't here when that was done, but you know, it's one of those things. I guess I don't know how to answer it.
Because I feel like all three entities, like Paula made a very good statement, each tripod is essential to our community. So I'm trying to wrap my thoughts around all three.
And Paul, just one comment. The feelings comment is related back to, you know, we've studied. We're talking about doing studies. We've studied it. That's where the 44,000 square feet came from. We're well under that now. So how do we get to? We can study it again. I can't imagine for the police's needs we're going to get. I can't imagine it's going to come back and be half. So we're going to get something very similar. So then what do we do with that? I mean, at what point, how do we align on what the need is?
I don't think we're talking about reassessing the needs that work to this bare bone for 24,000. I think the question is, can we do a study that looks at all three emergency services as it relates to the village-centric pieces of the other districts? Yes or no, in a reasonable amount of time. If we can't, then are there other alternatives we need to look at quickly? If not, then I feel we need to go out for bid and continue down the path.
And Pete, I would just say though, in a reasonable amount of time to construct it, because I mean, you know, if it's to be constructed in, let's say it comes back and the plan is viable, and we construct it 4 or 5 years from now, I mean, from a debt capacity perspective, I mean, this is gonna be a $50+ million project.
I'm not saying 4 or 5 years, man. I'm saying we need to figure it out. We need to, but if we plow forward and do this, and there's something that we haven't looked at, and maybe you've analyzed it from every way to Sunday, and maybe there's nothing. So 2 weeks from now, we'll take a look, and maybe we looked at that, we looked at that, we looked at that, done, we move forward. But if there's something there that ends up being better for the village, shame on us for not considering that alternative now, is my only point.
I do appreciate everybody's input and discussion tonight, and I agree too. I don't think we need to drag this out longer than 2 weeks. It's not fair, but, and that did come out sounding right. This is coming from me representing the people that voted me in as well. I heard a lot during my campaign about this subject. So tonight, I don't view this as contention. This has been a very good learning experience. So I agree. I don't think we should drag our feet very long. But out of respect for other board members, I don't think it would be fair to put anybody in a position where they feel like they can't vote or are forced to vote.
So I think so moving on, we're going to revisit this in 2 weeks. If there are other documents board members need to help clarify or, reach out to the appropriate staff member and make sure everyone has a really good understanding, I guess, of the project and the space and the need and the direction that's been given. And I don't know if we'll see other options from board members I'm assuming that'd be a future agenda item for the next, if that's going to be a discussion.
And I guess how are those vetted, though?
Right.
That's what I don't understand, I guess. So we have all these ideas, but then how are we going to figure out?
I think you're going to have a vote on, we're going to have a lot of votes.
Yep,
Do
we're
we
going
wanna
to
move-
talk about
Do we want to,
option 1, option 2, option 3 that you bring, and our last option will be to go to bed.
well,
is
that's
how
the
I
fault.
envision it. Yep.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to propose ideas and take votes on them.
All right. We're going to move ahead then. We're going to move on to new business. So we're going to discuss and consider the alcohol beverage license applications for licensing year July 2025 to June 2026. There's a list attached.
Thanks, Cindy. In the packet, there is the list. These all have had the background checks completed by the PD and the inspections by the PD, and they all were approved. The one note I will say on here is you'll notice that Grace Coffee is not on here. They did not complete their application. I've had numerous conversations, and to date, they have not provided the information, so they will not be getting a renewal.
Any questions?
Yes. How many, because we get a certain number of liquor licenses, how many do we still have left over?
So there's 2 different classifications of license that I think you're referring to. It's the reserve and the non-reserve. I don't have that in front of me. I can send that out to everybody. I will say that there are no non-reserve license available. Those have all been taken by establishments. However, we do have the others. I want to say, just don't quote me, but I want to say there's like 8 or more licenses that we have. That number grows by every 500 in population. So every year when we get our new population from DOA, I have a spreadsheet that I keep track of and then calculate that out. And if we are able to add one, we add one to our list.
And how are temporary ones factored into this? Do they just temporarily lower that number and then after the event it goes back up, or is it more of an exception, or?
So those are a different classification
Okay.
of license. So they're considered, they use the term picnic license a lot, you'll hear, or a temporary, and it's just, that's a different classification than like a bar restaurant type.
Any other questions? Otherwise, this is a discuss and consider.
I'd move approval of the alcohol beverage license applications for July 2025 to June 2026 as presented.
I'll second that.
Motion by Murphy, second by Dahl. Any other comments or questions? All All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain?
I abstain.
One abstention. Motion carries. And we're on B, discuss and consider the cigarette, tobacco, and electronic vaping device retail license applications for licensing year July 25 to June 26. There's attached list for tobacco license.
Same as the alcohol license, these all did have their background checks as well as the compliance checks. So the list that is before you is the same that you saw last year. There were no issues with the PD.
Any questions on this list? Or item?
No, I'll move to approve the 2025, 2026 tobacco and cigarette licenses as presented.
Second.
There's a motion by Dahl, a second by Severson. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Discuss and consider Resolution 2025-13, commemoration of Juneteenth 2025. There is a resolution attached in the agenda.
I'd make the motion to approve Resolution 2025-13 as presented.
I'll second.
There's a motion by Murphy, a second by Stoa. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. We have discuss and consider Resolution 2025-14, recognition of LGBTQI+ Pride Month for 2025. The resolution is linked in the agenda.
I'd make the motion to approve Resolution 2025-14.
I'll second the motion.
There is a motion by Murphy, a second by Wenzel. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Reports from village boards, commissions, and committees, the library board. Which is me. So the library board met on Wednesday, May 21st, 2025 at 6 p.m. We discussed and considered and approved our strategic plan that was slightly modified from the last board meeting that we had. It is now posted on our website for everyone to look at it. That is a 3-year strategic plan, so 25 through 28. We discussed and considered and approved the programming code of conduct, which was added to our policy manual for individuals who maybe have unacceptable behavior at library board programs. And this stemmed from an incident that we had a couple of months ago. So our approved updated policy manual is also on our website. We approved the Fall 25 contract with McFarland Public Library, who provides Storytime, Zumbini, and some library materials every Friday, and those contracts run during the semester, so it'll go from September through December of this year. We inactivated our library board subcommittee of community engagement and strategic planning. We considered some 2026 capital requests, mostly for this board to prioritize and give direction to the library board. We have our strategic plan. We're looking for direction from the board during the prioritization process, however that looks this year. We discussed and kind of the need to just kind of revisit options for a joint village town library facility and or service plan, and this is just mostly information seeking at this point, and there's state statute that regulates a lot of this, and we just want to put in writing, and we'll hopefully have at the next meeting the options and how these, or actually the lack of options most likely, but just so we have a concrete answer moving forward. We are canceling the August 20th library board meeting because it's community night out, so put that on your calendar. JP and Lisa were promoted to president and vice president respectively. Tracy then gave her very last programming report, which we had a very heavy spring programming, and they're going to be a little bit lighter on the June programming moving forward because Tracy did resign from her position. We did then already in our closed session, open session, closed session, discuss how to fill her her position. We did have a librarian that was interested already. News spreads fast. We didn't have to publicly post it, and she has verbally accepted the offer and will start mid-month. Exciting programs that the former library board president is filling in for is the Zoo to You, which is the kickoff to summer reading, and then Distillery. And there's a brand new story walk that was just put up this Saturday morning. We had correspondence from one person who attended the teddy bear sleepover, which everyone is always so appreciative of the collaboration between library, police, and then also when we do it with EMS, of course. We have a community read author selection. More will come on that in the next couple of months. And our next library board meeting is June 18th at 6 p.m. All right, so we will move on if there's no comments or questions for me. Can talk about Parks, Recreation.
Cindy, I had a quick question over here. I'm just wondering if anyone would object to moving Mr. Larson's CSM up in the agenda. He's been sitting here patiently, and it'll take about a minute or two, probably.
I am so sorry. You should have said something hours ago. Let's move down, if it's all right from the rest of the board.
Yes,
To Plan Commission. We can just move right into the discuss and the consider, and we can do Plan Commission other things later. So this is discuss and consider an application from Wilmar Larson for the approval of the ETJ certified survey map, which is creating one new 2.22 acre parcel east of 2177 Uphoff Road in the town within the ETJ area. This was discussed at Plan Commission. The Plan Commission approved it. Aaron, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, very briefly, Mr. Larson owns land in the town, way on the edge of the ETJ. He wants to split a lot off for his daughter to build a home. It's already been approved by the town and the county, so I don't see any reason to get in the way of that.
I would move approval of the application for Wilmar Larson.
And I'll second.
All right, motion by Severson, a second by Murphy. Any more discussion?
Thank you for your patience and sitting through the meeting tonight.
I am so sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. All right, we'll jump back up to Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Committee.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Good night. Parks, Recreation, Forestry met on Thursday, May 22nd. We went over the plan, the future unknown when it would come to fruition based on the financial management plan, the Bark Park rendering. We had worked with University, which is a program that we partner with UW-Madison, and they use various grad student and undergrad kind of final projects in their advanced level to work with municipalities, get real world experience. It's minimal cost, helps develop the future of the industry and gives us products that would be significantly less expensive than using engineering. And we get a new, young, fresh perspective on things. So we had a Bark Park concept plan that came from the university. And then as that was vetted through our Strand and Strand's consultant they used for park design, to put this into, FMP proposal, we have to know how much it's going to cost. So they kind of reworked what the students did to make it more feasible, to improve the Bark Park as, the Parks and Open Space Plan would hope that we would. And, we have some amenities there now, so this would be considered in the future in a financial management plan if we wanted to move forward. Otherwise, the plan sort of sits on the shelf until someday a board decides that they want to implement that. So the Parks Committee considered the proposal to add to a financial management plan proposal in the future. So we reviewed that, made some modifications to the design that would make it easier to maintain and more cost-effective, easier to access. So there some changes the committee wanted to see moving forward. We talked about the Houston Park update. That work is currently going on. Substantial completion is on track for June 13th. I haven't been by since last week. There was concrete and blacktop in, as you can see, where everything was lower in the land, and you'd get a lot of flooding. It's been raised up, so then the park structure isn't in the low area and drainage is better. And then the ball field is accessible to access the ball field. So that work is ongoing, and Houston is doing the work on that. There was a pickleball tournament, Wisconsin Youth Company. There's one other pickleball tournament planned for the summer in August. So that was a successful tournament. Those tournaments are only at Bakken Park. Community Park is reserved for community use, so we don't rent out that facility. So then there's always a spot for residents to play pickleball. Otherwise, summer programming is gearing up, and the splash pad is opened. Most of the meeting was taken up by Bark Park, so I don't know if anyone has any questions. Otherwise, our next meeting is the fourth Thursday in June.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is it possible to have the Parks Committee please study parking at Bakken Park? So I don't know if you were aware of the situation this weekend, but at one point, a firefighter and I were directing traffic on Grove Street, which is not like a good thing. But with rugby, and I think the police came down to it at some point, but it was kind of a hot mess. And people abided by the parking on No Clark until the yellow line stopped, but both sides of Vilas were lined. It was a mess, and I know that all of these things don't happen, but it was a lot, and I was nervous just for kids, especially on Vilas. People were parking on the grass. I've got all sorts of pictures. So again, if the Parks Committee can start just talking about this issue and tackling this issue, and I can provide pictures or whatever you need.
Yeah, and Parks is, we did touch on that a little bit during Sean's report because it came up with the Miracle League as well, and that was kind of like, well, it wasn't an agenda item, so he touched on it as a report, but it was definitely to come back. But we have had numerous conversations with rugby because the primary driver of the parking issues is the rugby events, and we've invited them to village board meetings in the past to try and come up with solutions with rugby, and we could do that again because I think that they are the primary driver of the parking situations and helping to come up with plans. We can pave the whole park and put in parking lots, but I think it's really the rugby events. And
yeah, I went down there too, and I'll tell you what, it was scary dangerous. And I saw some police officers there on Vilas. Cars were parked 25% in the lane because it kind of drops off. There were cars parked up and down Vilas, cars parked in the grass. It wasn't just rugby. There was rugby going on. The splash park had a lot of kids. The park had a lot of kids. There were some soccer games going on. There was a lot of a lot of kids on the skate park. I mean, it was a great day, but the parking was beyond unsafe in my opinion. So I do, something has to be done, and whether it's adding parking or whether it's some sort of controlled scheduling of activities, but something has to be done.
So I think Sean's on the call. I don't want to put you on the spot either, but if you wanted to say a couple words. I know that Sean and I have talked kind of extensively about parking and an analysis of the area and the number of sites available.
Yeah, ironically, I did have a conversation today with Brad from Rugby, and he agrees that he would like to sit down with Chief Gary and myself and just kind of talk about a plan moving forward for the remaining 5 events I think that they have, which I don't think any of them will be as big as what this weekend was, but it's hard to say. So, yep, it's something we're definitely going to hit hard.
This was, I think, with the state championship. Is that what was going on?
Yeah,
Rugby?
yeah, high school state championship girls.
Yeah. All right, any other comments for parks? Otherwise, we'll move forward to law enforcement. Chris? Paula?
So Law Enforcement Committee met on Tuesday, May 27th. Couple of agenda items. Lieutenant Wagner was there to talk about the history of emergency government, kind of his role in that and activity. There are some revisions going on to the emergency operations plan that I believe are coming to us later. We also talked about traffic enforcement in the village. This was an item I requested. So Chief gave us an overview as to kind of the general traffic philosophy, I don't know, and then also how they respond to complaints. And so that information was very helpful. We talked about reimbursement for repairs, and so a future agenda item is going to be talking about kind of reimbursement limits potentially for the PD. We discussed tow service protocols at Dane County Communications, so that'll be coming to us soon as well. Chief always gives some very detailed reports. There's a lot of information on them. If you don't currently read them, I would say look at them. I think one of the victories to highlight is the drug take-back event. We had a tremendous response, and for a community of our size, it was a huge response. I mean, we were like in the top 5 in the county. So, and obviously have the box left at the PD, as well as the partnership with Ford Pharmacy. So that was great. Did I miss anything, Chris?
I don't think so. I just wanted to clarify the reimbursement limits thing. We talked about if it's under a certain amount, just to let the police department handle it, not necessarily have to come to the law enforcement committee. If that makes sense.
Questions for law enforcement? All right, we'll move on to Cottage Grove Fire District Commission. Okay,
There's a
whoever
number
wants
of,
to-
you want to go, what's
I
that?
was why don't you just give the overview of the meeting, and then there are 3 discussed directions with corresponding agenda items linked in the
Okay,
agenda.
I'll be brief and we can get into the meat and potatoes. So we met on Tuesday, 5/27 at 6 p.m. It was moved from Memorial Day. We approved the April minutes, went through the chief's report. We discussed and considered the length of service awards, which we will talk about, I do believe, shortly here. So I won't get into that. We discussed the 2025-2035 capital needs, and again, I think we're going to talk about that in terms of the study. We also discussed the paper call, which is also going to be talked about. And then we did discuss and consider changes to the Pleasant Springs contract boundaries. There's just slight adjustment of the boundaries. We approved it, and it's contingent on Pleasant Springs reviewing and approving, and that was it.
All right, I invite Fire to come on up.
Well, I guess I should say one other thing. We did discuss the Knox box access, and I do believe, Larry, you and I spoke. I think Chief Gary and Chief Archibald are going to get together, sort of talk about next steps there, even though I don't necessarily know the jurisdiction of where it belongs, and I don't know, Larry, if maybe you want to mention something on that, but again, that was discussed.
Yeah, just, but nothing more than that. They were going to work on it and come up with what would work.
So I guess this is a much more comprehensive meeting than you typically see. And so there's 3 distinct agenda items, all of which potentially have material changes to the 2026 budget. So as being a partner with the town of Cottage Grove in the meeting, I had just requested that both boards discuss these items because I wouldn't want the fire district to put together a budget in September, it be presented, but then one community make significant changes to what they would be willing to fund. So the first and foremost, there was a discussion on direction on future facility needs and possible studies. And so what I plan to do is each memo, I'll go over a high level, turn it to the chiefs to make a comment, and then the board to provide some direction. I do just want to point out a lot of the recommendations and just wording of these memos come right from the PAA study. So it's not expressing an opinion or feelings in certain areas. And so the first one, direction on future facility needs and possible studies, just wanted to paint the picture here, was discussed at EMS, then joint fire, now coming in front of you. You know, the writing's on the wall. About 2 years ago, I asked both chiefs, you know, I know you guys haven't asked for anything yet, but what is the need? What we're gonna need to start planning for increased calls, village growth. The village continues to have an exponential increase in size and development. And so what does the potential planned areas of development, diversity of development when it comes to commercial and residential development, what does that look like? And so one thing of note is the PAA study did recommend that if there would be a new facility built, that the village should be the one solely responsible for the costs of the study. Again, that can be negotiated with the town of Cottage Grove. But again, as EMS's tenants of that facility, they're tenants of the Deerfield Station. And so under the current model, they exist in those spaces for free, and then the municipalities pay for the upkeep and maintenance of those facilities. And on the EMS or on the fire side, that those decisions have historically gone through the Joint Fire Commission, and those costs are split 50-50. And so one of the recommendations I had here is just due to the possible new facility being funded completely by the village, does it necessarily make sense to have a cost share with the town? Because the need's not really being driven by the town, it's being driven by growth in the village. And so there is also just a note from PAA. So with that, I'll let the chiefs kind of comment on that discussion that's been happening, and then kind of fill in any questions that you may have.
Well, I think where this all started is exactly as Chief Nick and Cam had said, is we got to ask for a building-specific capital allocation. We had done our own individual operations and laid out what we felt our own individual operations needed to be. This document represents what we believe the building would need, along with our overall facility needs. So when you look at to start off with the document top to bottom, is that we have some building needs, but we didn't attach them to a year because we have to get more answers on them for life expectancy when you talk about HVACs and plumbing fixtures and windows. We already have approved some lighting upgrades for the building. That's why it's listed for 2025. 2026 is a lower parking lot. That is also something that we haven't studied the cost, and that there was some thought of maybe one of the DPW departments, town or village, could assist with that. We know that we are going to need more facilities as we add more resources, especially an ambulance with the potential for overnight staff, or depending upon the needs of the fire department and their responding structure, that they may need to have the ability for someone to be in the station overnight. Is that we're full in those regards right now. We have 3 usable bedrooms, and typically 2 of them are being used by paramedics overnight. There is some day room space as identified by the PAA study for the fire department to utilize, but I wouldn't want anyone to sleep there. It's not why it was built. So that said, that's why for 2026, we put in the budget to plan ahead to do a study of what the facilities might be. Why we ask for someone else to do a study, Nick had alluded to this once already, is that a third-party vendor can come in and get our operational need and what we believe it's going to be in 5 to 10 years, but can also correspond that to development in the village and where there might be opportunities for property, where does the village develop to as opposed to where it doesn't develop to. Those are all pieces of information that we're not experts at. Nick's experts at incident mitigation, and I take care of people. So that's why we put in for the study of the facilities needs to know, and this whole plan is multifactorial, because we know we have a large roof repair that we need that right now we're going to guess is slated for $225,000 in 2027. But if through our facilities and growth planning study, it says that maybe the better or best option for the municipalities and the response area is to remodel the current building, we might not want to spend $225,000 on a roof that might be broken into to remodel again. So it's an if-then equation on what this plan was asking for. So it's simply not saying, oh yeah, we need a satellite facility and it needs to be here. It's that the people studying it would look at what the potential future needs are, the potential future makeup of the municipality, and how those intersect. When I look at this, understanding that the name of my department is Deer Grove EMS, this study to me is focusing more on the village, in that the largest growth in our 5 community district is in the village, and the largest utilizer of services is the village. But I don't believe that a second resource brought in to the village of Cottage Grove only benefits the village of Cottage Grove. It definitely benefits every one of our 5 communities. So I think that's a good overview. I don't know if Nick has anything to add.
Very similar to what Chief Lang was saying. To go back a little bit to Cameron's point too, like, I think we talked about it at one of the meetings we had in the last few weeks. Like, I know the PAA study suggested that if there was another station to be built, that it should be a sole village thing. But any station built would still benefit the town if you're doing a district formula. If, say, just for example, you put it on the north end of town where our heat map is probably the most dense for us, is that area right around and in Gaston. Just putting another station there gets services to the outlier of the town that's on the north end. There's town to the north, there's town to the northeast over there. So I don't, like Cameron said, there could be some negotiation there when you're talking about if you're talking about a satellite station, and discussions with the town, because in the broad picture, if you're doing a district formula still, then it would still benefit them. And as I alluded to earlier, like, our needs, I don't know when they're gonna change. Like I said, we're keeping up right now. We have a good number of staff, but all it takes is a few people to get a different job, or our call volume to spike to a level that's unsustainable. That, right now, like I said, we're averaging almost 1 call per day, but it doesn't come in as 1 call a day. It comes in as 4 calls on one day and 8 calls a different day and 0 calls for 2 weeks. So when a person has to leave their job for 4 to 8 times a day to come to a call, because a lot of them are coming in during the day, it's disruptive to their way of life, or even if it's not during the day, when they're trying to sleep or whatever else they have going on. So we're just trying to plan ahead so that when it does become unsustainable, it's not, let's rush and try to fix this. Let's try to just plan ahead a little bit so that if this becomes unsustainable, it's not an emergency, needs to be done right now kind of thing.
I think too, one thing I want to point out, the emergency service building fund, the budget that's requested is an extremely skinny. Kim and these departments, they're just getting by with what, again, that's what's been requested, so it's not anybody's fault. But just to reduce the reliance on volunteers doing work, There should be money in the emergency service operating fund to contract certain services out. We don't need, I know Nick is handy and others are handy, but they don't need to be doing those services, especially when we're relying on volunteer time. One other conversation that's sort of tied to this and further conversation is when we did meet, they did ask the village to look into changing the personnel policy to allow village staff, if they so choose, to become volunteer firefighters, and should they be called off during work, be allowed to respond to those calls. Again, just we were looking for creative ways to assist in the way that were possible. And again, that wouldn't be mandatory. It would be something that staff would have, certain staff would have volunteer. So that is something that we can also look into as well. I know that was the out of all the things we're going to talk about, that's the one thing that didn't quite make it in to the packet.
All right, so the first discussion item on the facility study. So I guess I can start. I'd like to see a scope of at least, the 5 to 10 years out, looking at facilities for fire and EMS, also on operational models. I think obviously our chiefs can give us a pretty good idea of the KPIs that have to be hit before a third ambulance or a second ambulance is needed, or where I think the study needs to identify where, if and where a satellite station needs to go, in what part of the village, and what that would look like, I guess. Go ahead, Paula.
I'll just add, so Cindy and I met with the town chairman, Steve Anders, as well as the chiefs and other fire officers. And some of the concerns from the town that Steve brought up would be, again, he would prefer it be about 10 years out, at least 10 years out, like that it's included. The town would, and again, he was speaking on his behalf. He has not consulted his town board. I should back that up, sorry. But he would like an RFP to consider. His comment was, don't make the EMS district bigger. Don't have it be a boilerplate study. And he did not bristle at the idea of a funding split. In fact, he seemed to think that the town board would be amenable to sharing the cost. And so I say, if they're willing to help us share the cost, let's share the cost. Because we have 2 districts. Again, it's a little different. I know the PAA study and all the factors, but I really want them to be a valuable partner in this. So if they're willing to share the cost, let's let them. So those were just some points from our conversation with the chiefs.
Yep, and to the cost share point, more than happy to share the cost. I think we get into studies like this and agreeing on scope becomes challenging. And so what this method of funding would allow is the village board would have much more, I would say, control and direction. We could still listen to and get town feedback, but ultimately be the driver of the facility, but certainly up for discussion.
Yeah, I think my concerns were compromising on scope, and I wanted to make sure that we weren't going to do that from a village perspective. But we need to put a scope together first and get feedback on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing that Paula mentioned about EMS not growing. And Steve meant not growing outside of our current boundary. So not taking on additional response area outside of our 5 municipalities, knowing that we're likely going to have to grow to respond to need of our communities. So just that point of clarification. Some response statistics for us is that we're anticipating a 10% increase from last year to this year to put us at about 1,570 calls. And then I would expect 10% to be about standard with the rate that Cottage Grove is growing moving forward. So 25 will be 1,570, 26 is likely to be 1,726, and we've been watching the KPIs that Cindy mentioned on when we believe we'll need to have extra resources, and that doesn't necessarily mean a full ambulance worth of extra resources, or by full ambulance I mean 8 staff 24/7. We have the ability to be flexible and respond to times of peak need.
And you said scope. Scope is critical, right? And I think it kind of dovetails into some of these the upcoming items is personnel, right? So the facility itself is one thing, but the personnel needs drive some elements of the facility. So they have to go hand in hand. We don't have to have an infinite study of how many particular career firefighters we have. We just need to understand when, where, and how we would need some of the facility infrastructure, whether it's sleeping quarters and et cetera, in whatever facility we end up in. So that's key in the scope.
I would say as part of the scope too, you know, one of the things that was brought up in our meeting would really be to have our village planner kind of participate in this because obviously the village's growth is going to play a piece in this. Also in the scope, I would like to see, and it actually doesn't necessarily need to be part of the study, it can be its own thing now, but we should discuss public safety impact fees in terms of funding mechanisms. So when we talk about this, Deerfield, for instance, has a $679 impact fee for fire and EMS, right? Fitchburg, Oregon, Verona have a fire impact fee. DeForest has a public safety impact fee. So I think that should play a role in all of this in terms of planning, growth, development, that sort of thing.
More comments to give to, or direction to give to staff on this particular item? Heidi?
Thanks. I think we have, you know, a good start on things, facilities, operational models, planning, you know, other funding opportunities. I think those are good things. Now, one thing that we talked about earlier that I don't know if then this is the appropriate time to bring this in. Are we doing a different study before we get the scope of this study to bring in if the law enforcement, the police department would be housed in the same building? Like, so the flow, like, I'm wrapping my head around what we need to do looking at fire and EMS, but are we like adding another layer in now, or like an alternative, or do we want them to study two things? Because I just want to make sure that, because I think we're interested in like getting this going soon, and places that do studies and good places are, you know, starting to book up for the end of the year and into the next year, because it's already June. So like, are we gonna do something else quickly and then have this later, or do we want them to do police department included in this? I guess I just want to make sure that staff's clear, so then they're bringing back what we'd like to see on the study.
And I guess to that end, also talking about, timeline to start, timeline for completion.
Can we just back up for a second? The takeaway I had from the previous conversation was the timing of the infrastructure we need for fire and EMS was disparate enough from the police that we were done with that. So it's either we're going to move forward with the station and quote it as is, go out for bids, or we're going to talk about some other alternatives that will be closer in next week and determine whether or not we want to do anything on that or not. That was my takeaway.
So to be clear then too, then it's not a police fire EMS station that would be studied in the 26 study.
So we're gonna study a fire EMS, so we're deciding a fire EMS study for operational and facilities. So then why aren't we moving forward with the police? I mean, I know this is back farther, but.
Potentially could be an alternative site, a creative solution. Just the last little bit we need to make sure that we do our due diligence at the next meeting before we move on with a bid and moving forward with the police project as is.
So do we want staff to spend a lot of time getting an RFP ready for us to take back to fire, which is something that we talked about, having an RFP to come back to fire commission for us to think about with the town, right? I mean, we talked about this at the meeting. If we're then gonna amend that RFP in the 2 weeks to also include police. So then why would we study, so this is just the facility needs, this isn't like the.
You could pause this conversation for 2 weeks, right? I mean, if we're pausing the other conversation, it makes sense to pause this.
On the RFP, we're going to do an RFP.
Turn your mic on. Mike.
Have we defined that an RFP is the direction we want to go?
From our conversation that we had last week, I think, if the town is included, I know that they want to see an RFP, but I think that also puts us, that can limit who responds to the RFP, who doesn't respond to RFPs. And so I think we should start with the scope first. And do you need to take that back to fire this month? We can postpone it. The town also didn't have this on their town agenda for today.
We're gonna meet before joint fire meets again.
Okay.
As far as needs and staffing projections, that's something like outside of, whether the facility's joined, like you're gonna need this much square footage for sleeping quarters for this many people, and at this, when you start missing these benchmarks, that's when you have to add in, 24-hour staff. This is when you add paid in, we're already, considering later on the paid on call. So like when you meet these certain thresholds, and that's part of the PAA study. So we, that portion can move forward, but actually like joining the facility is kind of I guess,
I
the
think-
facility
But the
side.
urgency of the fire EMS isn't like the urgency we had talking about police, and we've separated those now, right? So now we're talking about, we need to put together the right scope to study fire and EMS. And when the KPIs get to the point that we need to adjust our staffing models, whether it's, paid on call, maybe it's, whatever it might be, but that's gotta be done. It's got to be done, in this timeline, we're saying by 27, 28, so we can have a facility by 2030. So
I think your decision, and I say your because I won't be part of it, I think your decision on the next step, if you move to a pay-per-call model, that sets into motion a different scope than we're talking about at this moment. So that's why I'm saying I think it's okay to pause this for 2 weeks, because that could change things.
I think
And
that.
Oh, sorry, Cindy.
No, go ahead.
Just to, one simplistic way to look at a scope could just be essentially updating the PAA studies, but combining them, not combining the departments, but bringing the operations together in a way that you can holistically look at the facilities.
But I think, the village, we're obviously all on the same page for moving forward with a study. I think we're all in agreement that a study needs to be done. I think some of the scope is been defined, and we can.
Yeah, I guess the only reason why I brought that RFP up is certain not-for-profit agencies don't respond to RFPs.
Right.
So is going out for bid worth possibly 30 or 40% more in cost than seeking out qualified firms and working with them and bringing the best option forward, not just the ones that responded to an RFP. And so again, as we're working through this process, you add layers into it. If we're doing it with the town, even this part has to be agreed upon, and then a cost share formula has to be agreed upon, and then the scope has to be agreed upon. So this will be a couple months, I think, worth of decisions to get to a final end product. And so the reason why I've again put this option in there is telling the town that we, understanding that we were the big driver of this, we would take care of this. If we want to put something in the study that when a facility plan's implemented, we'll get credit for like 30% of our facility study or something like that. There's a creative way to possibly recapture some of those costs. But I just it's good to start talking about this now, knowing that 2026 budget decisions are going to be coming down the line.
All right, so we will move on then, pause this. Okay, we can also send maybe formal communication to the town, gauging their interest in participating, cost sharing, moving forward. Formally.
Steve, they seem to be open to sharing. And again, I think let's just pause this conversation till next meeting, and then we can take that to the town
Okay.
in the joint fire meeting.
All right, so let's move on to discuss direction on staffing compensation for the 2026 budget consideration. There's another memo in the packet from Cameron.
You guys just get to hear me talk all night. One page. Again, material change in a possible budget request. So this is specifically talking about compensation. Currently we have a full volunteer department with certain stipends for certain positions. We worked with April and Chief Archibald to talk about what an estimated cost for implementation, pay for call, not on call, two different things. Terminology is important. And so again, just the PA study indicated certain metrics. This was being one of those metrics. Again, Cottage Grove Fire is not proposing becoming a municipal department, but remaining private. And so before we direct fire to come forward with this or increase their salaries and wages by roughly $72,400, I wanted to get the gauge of board members, as well as provide Nick and April with some feedback regarding the personnel for the budget process.
So the thought was to try and recruit more members and try to get people to come down for more calls. The next step in the process would be to move to a paid per call model. As Cameron alluded, the difference paid on call is like having people on the facility all the time. Paid per call is they're only getting paid for each call that they respond to. So we broke down what that model would look like to figure out the numbers for this model. The Wisconsin Fire Chiefs put out a list every year where they solicit what their current salaries are for all the departments, different positions, paid per call members, so on and so forth. So we looked at that list, came up with an average for what other departments are doing, and then kind of put together a list of costs for what it would come out to roughly with what we have.
I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of just your current department and the volunteers that you have, and maybe some culture changes or why this would be important to implement.
Yes, so I mean, we're definitely seeing a shift. 20 years ago, we had people would come down, they were down, pretty much lived down there. They'd come down for calls, all the trainings. But what we're seeing now is, as we bring on more members, we're not seeing the same enthusiasm as with the newer staff, I guess. There are some members that are kind of into that, but it's definitely a steep difference where we're seeing members who are really excited when they first get there, but usually within the first 6 months, you start to see them kind of taper out, where they're meeting more like minimum standards. They meet minimum call volume and they meet the minimum training, but it's not the same, enthusiasm. And we bring people on and we get some time out of them, and there's a lot of people that are looking for a career in fire, so they come on, they get their certifications, and then they move on to another department where they become a career member. Since we're a volunteer, our current stipend, we pay people for training and Sunday duties. If you came to every single training, every single Sunday duty, it's not a significant number. I think it's, $1,500 to $2,000 a year for somebody if they gave up basically every Tuesday and every Sunday. So it's not a huge number. And people just aren't really willing to do it anymore. There's still some people that pretty much live down there, but we're competing for people's time. So we figured that this would be another way that, maybe it would incentivize some of the people that are newer to come down more, come to calls more. We're doing really well for staffing during the days, and so that's not really been our issue, but we're kind of running into some of the issues with like weekends, and people want to go out and have a good time, so then they aren't really coming down as much on the weekends. So we thought maybe we could try incentivizing a little bit, so if we're competing for their time, maybe now if they're receiving some kind of a stipend for coming, it would be more incentivized for them to respond.
I just want to add too that we are probably one of the only departments in the county that doesn't provide any type of stipend or pay for call. So we are far behind in this area as far as a pay-per-call model. I actually don't know of any in Dane County that don't receive any monetary compensation for response to call. So I think maybe getting to some type of pay-per-call model, whether it's, and I know Cameron mentioned maybe halfway through the year next year, we might not be able to do it initially at the beginning of the year, but we can be flexible in that way. We really want to make sure that we are doing something for the staff and we're incentivizing it in some way, shape, or form sometime soon, sometime very, very soon. We don't want to stay behind in this area. We want to make sure that we're bringing staff in and that they want to be there and that this is of interest to them. But we also find that we may lose staff because they might get paid $15 somewhere else at another department, or $15 an hour volunteering, or on a paid per call or paid on call model somewhere else. So they might not want to work here because they're getting paid in the neighboring department to work there. So we have competition now. There is competition out there, and we have to meet that competition where it's at somehow. And I think this is the start to that. And like I said, we have to do it soon. We have to get on top of it.
How does this compare to those other volunteer departments, April? Like $10 for the station crew per call, is that about the same?
Great question. So like Nick alluded to, is the Wisconsin State Fire Chiefs sends out a spreadsheet every year, and they survey how everybody in the state is paying, whether it's from salary to a chief, to an assistant chief, to a captain, to their fire inspector, and then to a firefighter. But they also do a separate sheet within that model that is for paid on call, paid on premise. And so we took this average based on what we were seeing in that spreadsheet from everybody that was surveyed. And we can always share that with you too, that spreadsheet, so you can kind of see how we got that number and these numbers here.
Yeah, and I just want to let the board know, the reason why I give the option for the mid-year is, again, we're partners with another municipality here. So we could ultimately make the decision that, yes, let's move forward with this model, but there might not be the fiscal ability for the town. So I don't want any definitive motion or direction. I would say I would need general consensus from the board on what would be your top end of being interested in, and then we'll go back, work with Kim and the town, and have them incorporated in the first draft of the budget in July. And again, that's great that you have the financial information for the surveyed in the communities. I think you'd almost, though, into considering this, you don't want to end up in the same situation we are. So what is the mechanism for adjusting these, like giving direction to the fire commission to analyze and propose increases? Don't just keep it flat for 5 years or 4 years and expect it to keep up with other communities.
So your concern is, so as I look at this, it's an increase of $71,000 for the district, which is shared like 70-30-ish.
Yeah.
So the town would be looking at $20,000. Are you concerned about the town being able to pony up to an important emergency service like this, $20,000?
I'm not going to speak about the importance of it, but I'll speak to if their net new construction was 10,000 last year, we'd be asking them to do double what their net new construction allowable increase was. Now, I'm not saying they can't make room elsewhere, but I also don't know what other priorities and other things they have going on in their budget. And that's why I was hopeful that both boards were going to have this discussion tonight, so the fire district had clear direction on where to go. Because it might be both boards are like, yep, go for it 100% of the year. Let's see what it looks like and let's move on. But at this time, I don't know the direction from either board.
I mean, my 2 cents on it is this is a critical service. We're doing now 1 call per day on average where you've got these multiple calls. This is quite a burden on volunteers. And for us to go, well, we'll just wait 6 more months, I don't think that does justice to the problem at hand. And I guess I would certainly think my perspective from the village would be that I would support this given the nominal nature of the dollars for the village. Now, again, that would just be my recommendations here. I don't know what the town would do and how that is going to vet out at joint fire, but I think we just need to kind of put our position on the table.
I would tend to agree. I mean, I think that this is essential, and I think it's, having difficulty making sure we have enough people for a call is a performance indicator that, signals we need to do something different. I am, of course, concerned about the finances. If we look back at the levy limit projections and the net new construction, 118,000 is the estimate of our levy increase. And so we're looking at EMS negotiations, and we're looking at police department contract negotiations. So, how do we make this fit in, and and how does I'm not sure what their contract escalator is with Dane County Sheriff's Department. I'm not, they'll be paying their portion to increase their levy for EMS. So I'd love to see this all fit in, and so how we model that to make sure it all fits in our very limited levy limit adjustment that we can make next year, because
Yeah, I
that's
guess
small.
I'd like to see it come back kind of with 2 different scenarios maybe, just so we can have both on, take a look.
So what I would recommend there is in July, when a budget's being presented to the Joint Fire Commission, that 2 options be presented, one with the mid-year option and one with a full-year option. That is then taken and incorporated into our financial management plan. That way, everybody can see what the true impact is, and we'll have possibly some updated costs for other things that are in the pipeline as well.
So one other point from the PAA studies, once we move to the paid on-call, but I'm not sure about the paid per call, those employees would become municipal employees, most likely of the village. But you're proposing administratively, the fire would be able to cover.
Yeah, we could manage it. So we could manage it ourselves, and the PAA study actually said that it could be done as a district with the village being the fiscal agent, is actually the verbiage from the PAA study, so.
So I think that would be another component then too that would have to be discussed is.
If I'm being frank, I mean, I think the study updating kind of all components of the PAA study and facilities is important. I think for both communities to understand what cost share should be. We currently split ESB 50-50. Is that necessarily fair to the town when most of the usage is coming from? So like there's 2 sides of this that I think both communities and all members of EMS would benefit from a refreshment on this. And again, I'm not advocating for the village paying for more things, but again, being in fairness to the fire department.
Do board members have other comments on the staffing compensation? All right, let's move on to the length of service program, which is the final thing to talk about for fire tonight.
Okay, so before, and hopefully April, you don't mind staying up there, going to paid per call, wonderful idea. With talking with April and Nick, I also think it's important to both recognize the volunteers that have served the community as well as the volunteers that continue to serve the community. So this is a preliminary kind of discussion about what's called a length of service award. April had reached out to the state to get some clarification on some statute. and prior contributions. But essentially what this does is the district would fund a certain dollar amount for each volunteer per year. The state would either match it, I think 2 to 1. I think that's either 1 to, it's very confusing language in the statute.
It was, I did get something back from both VFIS and PenFlex, and I will forward you that, because they
Okay.
do clarify it in the email a little bit, but it's still just as confusing, so I want you to know that when you read it. But it's twice the amount that you contribute.
So basically what this would allow is develop a retirement program for volunteers. My recommendation, or at least my recommendation for discussion, is not only to, if with the volunteer model, look prospectively, but also backwards and determine a length of period that the village is willing to go back and fund, and set kind of a preliminary dollar amount that the village per volunteer in gross, and then those costs would be split via aggregate. April mentioned at the last meeting, which was a pleasant surprise for me, that the prior funding could be funded with the Pleasant Springs funds. So essentially we could do this without having any tax impact, and then future years would be funded. So then I believe the maximum is 369.
So it was, well, okay, so it changes every year.
Okay.
So in statute, it says 390, but I think what I saw was maybe 456 was last year's, was what they paid out. So it changes every year. And then for previous years of service, it's a minimum of $100 if you want to contribute for previous years of service, but you can do more. You can do up to whatever I think you want. And I don't know if the state matches previous years. I actually kind of don't think they do, but that's something that I'm working on verifying right now. And then as Cameron had mentioned, for the previous years of service, which could potentially add up to, as we noted there, $75,000 to $80,000, just based on the calculations on years of service that we have from staff. So that it's not a financial impact, and then trying to figure out calculations between the municipalities year by year, which would just be chaos. Looking at utilizing the Pleasant Springs funds for that payment, and then every year going forward, just out of our operating budget, adding that in for the contributions.
So looking for 2 things. Dollar amount is would the goal be to, going forward, just maximize what we're able to contribute, and then the state doubles is $200 a dollar amount, $250 a dollar amount, and then just general direction. Does the board feel comfortable providing funding for, or telling the joint fire that it's okay to use Pleasant Springs fund to fund prior years?
I see a lot of
There's
nodding heads.
Nodding heads
And I
on
think,
both accounts. What about a dollar amount?
So the number that you had in here, the annual amount for 26 of 13.5, April, is that assuming $300 per active member?
Yeah.
Assuming then that the state would match that, right?
Right, yep, that's the number I threw in there, because I wasn't sure what you guys would want to do. I think when Cameron originally did this, he maybe was going with 225 or...
Yeah, 225 or 250.
Or
That was in
something like-
2022. Again, this was brought up a while ago, and then it kind of, I don't want to say stalled out, but I think there's a lot of things going on. So just, again, working with fire to get this back on everybody's agenda, and let's move forward with something.
So I didn't know his numbers when I put this together, so I just kind of threw out a guess of 150 for previous years and 300 for all years going forward. And it's entirely up to you guys what you would be interested in doing. You can go up to, statute says 390, but I think you can go up to whatever the current year's rate is, which is in the 400s. So it doesn't matter to us, like, because I will tell you, none of us are necessarily in this for the retirement, and Jess is over there and he will tell you the same thing. Like, this isn't something we're all coming here to do and sitting here as volunteers thinking, I want a big chunk in my retirement because I volunteered for 25 years or 50 years or whatever like that. So it's not, it's definitely would help maybe with retention of members more than anything else. And it's kind of a special bonus at the end of service. But for us, I don't know if it's up to you guys what you would want to contribute for something like this.
Yeah, I think retention's critical. I mean, that's what we were talking about before. So anything we can do to put together a program for volunteers that make them feel like the community is acknowledging their efforts and incents them to stay is critical. I think if we did the $300 as a match, it's pretty nominal. I think we, as Cam, you pointed out, we've got to be cognizant of the town and their ability to participate in the in the cost breakout, right?
Would the village be interested in moving forward if the town was not? So again, knowing that the prior year is $100 per service, and is that something that you guys could facilitate if the town wasn't participating?
Yeah, I mean, we'll work with whichever vendor. So we were requested to reach out to both vendors that provide this, and we'll work with the JFC obviously and let them know what information we got. And if the town says no, we don't want to participate, obviously we would come to the village and say, here's the two vendors. Is there one you prefer more than the other? I will say just off the bat that we already work with VFIS for our workers' compensation insurance, so we're familiar with how they operate and some of their staff that they have there. But it doesn't mean that the other one might not have some really valuable information or incentives along with their program. So as we collect information, we'll give it to the JFC and move it up the chain.
I mean, when you talk about the town not participating, I personally find that disturbing, right? You're talking about 30% of 13.5 is $3,000. I would think they would want to come to the table. It's critically important for the town as it is for the village, so I would want to start with that.
Yep, I just want to make sure, because kind of as we kind of go through the checklist of things as we develop a budget, you know, just making sure we have a mechanism to still be able to do this program if the board wants to and the town does not. Again, $3,000 is nominal. Like, in my opinion, $3,000 nominal. This is a huge win, I think, in my opinion, with the funds that on hand and the frankly low cost. I think it would be a good idea, and I don't want to cause a ton of work for you guys, to present the max, and then maybe if the board is interested to seeing a $300, was $300 the other one?
For
the future estimate, like just to estimate in the budget.
What's your thought there? I don't get it.
Well, just to have different options, like the paid on call, like the paid on call mid-year, to also see what does the maxing out the cost look like for 50 volunteers.
I mean, if you're concerned about the town not participating and then maxing, I don't understand if that's a strategy.
I'm not concerned about the town at all. They can make their decisions.
But I am, because they need to participate. And if this whole thing is about retention, right, that's why we're doing this, right? We want to make sure that they feel the love, right, for their efforts. And at the end of the day, the alternative, right, when you think of a BATNA in any negotiation, the BATNA here is a full paid per call because everybody quits.
Yep.
Right? We can't let it get to that point. So we got to work with the town. We need to make sure that we're doing everything possible to continue to work on building the morale and making sure we have retention. That is absolutely critical.
Yep.
Thanks, Peter. And I know Cindy was in the meeting with the town chairman, and he expressed, I think, and I don't necessarily want to speak for him, but he did seem interested. And he actually did mention an interest in the EMS volunteers and pursuing this initiative with them. But I know that Chief Lang only has maybe a handful of them, but it would still matter to them too. So I want to just throw that out there, that as we're pursuing this for us, I think that that's something too to consider for the 3 to 5 members he might have that would be eligible for this program as well.
Do you and also, I guess, Cameron, have enough direction from us to put together what you need for the next joint fire meeting?
I think I do. I think there's general consensus that this program is accepted and wanting to see what the true cost.
Propose using the Pleasant Springs fund as well.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can put that together. I think that was one hang-up possibly with the town, that maybe they were concerned about using the Pleasant Springs funds, but I think that that's something we can have further discussions on with them through the JFC and try to gain some support.
Are there any more comments for fire? Okay. We can move on to. Yeah, thank you for sticking around. I hope that clock is wrong, otherwise it's way past my witching hour. Landfill.
So landfill met on May 27th, immediately following the Joint Fire Commission meeting. It was a pretty brief meeting. We approved the bills, and Steve Anders gave us, Renee and I, a brief summary of, the history of the landfill and, the monitoring program. And we meet every other month, so our next meeting then would be in July.
All right, any questions for Heidi?
Can you repeat all of that? I missed the beginning.
Oh,
No,
sure.
I'm just
No.
kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
We can watch the tape later.
All right, we'll move on to Plan Commission. So Plan Commission met on Wednesday, May 28th at 6:30. We already discussed the application for the ETJ. We also discussed a proposal to amend the comprehensive plan to permit 4 units on a house on Main Street. And then we kind of gave them more information, ideas for moving forward, and expect to see that on a future agenda. We discussed the site amendment for Toby's Auto, which is located on Bonnie Road, and then also the potential zoning ordinance amendment related to auto sales in a planned industrial district. That will also come back at a future, all together as a future agenda item. We had a public hearing, and then also discussed and considered the amendment to the zoning, or to the floodplain zoning, which was initiated by the Wisconsin DNR, and that is also on for us to discuss and consider that amendment tonight. We then discussed the zoning ordinance changes related to beekeeping and approved that as well, which is also on our agenda tonight. We changed the June meeting to June 18th at 6:30 because Aaron has jury duty, maybe. And then have a list for future agenda items, and our next meeting, again, is June 18th. Are there questions, or Aaron, do you want to add anything first, and then move into the
Just
discuss
gonna
and consider?
skip to the decisions unless you have other questions.
I just have one quick question. The discussion of Toby's Auto, are they a good neighbor to Public Works? Is there any impact on Public Works? Did Kyla give any feedback?
I'll ask, but I think in the past, the relationship's been
Okay.
good.
Okay, so we do have a discuss and consider, first, the proposed amendment to Chapter 183, the floodplain zoning as recommended by the Wisconsin DNR.
I would move approval of the amendments to Chapter 183, floodplain zoning as recommended by the Wisconsin DNR.
And I will second.
There's a motion by Severson and a second by Murphy. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. We have discussed and consider amending the zoning ordinance related to beekeeping. This had come to the village board, and we had given adjustments to notify neighbors, and how the kind of the notification process and registration process, had that discussion at Plan Commission, and those revised ordinance information is also linked in the agenda. Do you have anything you want to add, Aaron?
Yeah, we basically just added numbers 9 and 10 to the regulations. Number 9, to notify adjacent property owners, and 10, that any beekeepers shall sign a form that the village provides indicating that they're going to follow all of these regulations.
And I had made the suggestion too that we not enforce this, I guess, until next year, because moving a hive that isn't in compliance with this is not a good idea right now, since they are moving.
So they're gonna notify adjacent property owners, so what's the ramification? Is it just let them know? So I guess my point is, if I decide to have 4 beehives of however big they are, 25, and my neighbor has a child that has a bee allergy, right? I mean, it's rare, but anaphylactic shock is serious. So what's a ramification? Just let them know. And if they don't like it, they move, or they keep their kid out of the yard, or they put them in a net. I guess I'm trying to understand, if I'm a neighbor and I'm told that, hey, I'm gonna have bees, do I have any recourse at all? And from this, I don't, right?
No, it's just making them aware is what this is doing.
So if you have someone who's looking at buying a house, is there some sort of registry that they can see? I gotta believe they would have to go to the village and go, hey, does anybody have beehives before I buy this house? If I have a child that has a bee allergy.
Yeah, so if we have these on file, then we would know the ones who
Okay.
registered before.
Okay.
And people do make those kind of
Okay.
calls about all kinds of
Yeah,
issues.
I think the possibility is, it's such an extreme thing, but it's very serious when it actually happens, if you've ever seen it.
And I think that we discussed a little bit at Plan Commission too, the reason there is a flyaway zone and the water is so that the bees do return back to their hive. And I mean, they're gonna travel a lot further than just the house next door too. And so I think that this,
I mean, the next step that would address some of what you're asking about, I think, would be a conditional use permit, which has, fairly high cost for the beekeepers, about $300-something. Every hive would have to come to Plan Commission and the board. I think the Plan Commission felt that was maybe overkill, but that would be the next step.
The notification process would allow a notification, and then, further conversation could happen between neighbors. You could go knock on your neighbor's door and be like, my kid, yeah. And then, right, and then if you're not following the regulations and, the enforcement mechanism, you can become, what's the word I'm looking for? A
What-
public nuisance that you're not following the.
That's possible, it's possible, but really, it'd just be a zoning violation, and that could be enforced, just like any zoning violation.
so this is a discuss and consider.
I would make the motion to approve the amending the zoning ordinance related to beekeeping as presented.
Second, and I have a question. Should we also put something about the enforcement as part of the motion?
We had discussed it at Plan Commission and Larry had a recommendation, didn't you?
About not enforcing this until next year? Do we need to specify that as part of the motion?
No.
Okay, thank you.
So there was a motion by Murphy and a second by Severson. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Reports from village officers, village attorney. Larry. Nothing. Finance director.
I guess I have both of these amendments are very simple, straightforward. One is just a budget amendment to reflect the borrowing that has been approved, issued, and then accounted for. And then the second one relates to TID 9. Both of the leases during the budget process had end dates prior, only a couple months in the year. Now that we've put into account significant increases in what those lease payments are, I'm just recommending that the budget and corresponding expenditures are subsequently adjusted. So happy to answer any questions on these budget amendments.
Comments for Cameron or questions?
I'll make a motion to approve both budget amendments 2025-06 as well as budget amendment 2025-07 as presented.
And I would second.
There's a motion by Dahl, a second by Murphy. Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Communications and other and miscellaneous business. Consider approval of vouchers. The bills list is linked to the agenda.
I would move approval of the bills list as presented.
Second.
Motion by Murphy, second by Severson. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Correspondence. We did have one email to the village board about the petition for Landmark and Michelle Drive Lane. There's about 550 signatures on there asking to reinstate the stop sign. And obviously the village is we've talked about this in multiple committee meetings and about how we are looking and actively evaluating that intersection. And we'll continue to report back when there are actionable items for us to address. Any other correspondence? Upcoming community events. The Hot to Trot is on June 14th at 7 a.m. We need volunteers and runners, so you are all invited to sign up. I know a lot of you already have, but I could always use a few more, please. It's also Fireman's Festival weekend that weekend, which starts on Thursday and runs to Sunday, and they have a lot of exciting events. You can check out their social media on their websites. Zoo to You kickoff to summer reading program, like I mentioned, is that Thursday as well. It's the last day of school. It's Zoo to You. It's festival. It's all happening all at once. So, yes.
And congratulations to all the graduates of class of 2025 at MG.
All right. Future agenda items. I think we have a couple of that we've identified throughout the night. Anything else to add?
Potentially a future agenda item for tonight, but if you guys are antsy, you won't offend me at all. It's just a goals check-in for tonight's closed session. If you guys are antsy and want to move on tonight, we can do that at the next meeting.
Skip it.
But that's up to you guys.
Yeah. All right. So I'm seeing nodding heads for the lack of need for the closed session tonight. So we can move on to number 13.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
A motion by Severson, second by Murphy. Non-debatable. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.